Hey guys, tonight we begin with silks, schemes, and systematic subjugation. We're diving deep into the perfumed prisons and gilded cages of the Ottoman imperial harem, where your greatest dream was to catch the Sultan's eye for a single night, and your greatest nightmare was, well, also catching the Sultan's eye for a single night. Forget the romantic fantasies Hollywood sold you about mysterious veiled beauties lounging on silk cushions, feeding each other grapes. Tonight we're exploring what it was actually like to be a concubine in the Ottoman Empire, where your entire existence revolved around one man's whims. Your survival depended on navigating a labyrinth of female politics more cutthroat than any corporate boardroom, and your value as a human being was measured entirely by your ability to produce male heirs. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're 8 years old, and your world is about to end. Not literally, though you won't understand the difference for many years to come. You're playing in the dusty streets of your village, somewhere in the vast Ottoman territories. Maybe Georgia, maybe Circassia, maybe one of the Greek islands that dot the Aegean like scattered pearls. The exact location doesn't matter, because what's about to happen to you happens to thousands of little girls across the empire every single year. The sound you hear approaching isn't thunder, it's hoofbeats. Imperial scouts, representatives of the Dev-Shami system, the Ottoman Empire's systematic collection of human tribute. But while history books focus on the Janissaries, the Christian boys taken to become elite soldiers, there's another harvest happening simultaneously, a quieter one, a more intimate form of slavery that historians politely call recruitment for the imperial household. You don't run when you see the horses, because you don't yet understand what horses carrying imperial banners mean for little girls. Your parents do. Your mother's face goes white as parchment, and your father takes an involuntary step backward. But there's nowhere to run, and running would only make things worse for everyone you love. The selection process is clinical and terrifying. You're lined up with other girls from your village, some as young as 6, none older than 10. These aren't random raids by barbaric warriors. This is a sophisticated state apparatus with very specific requirements. The officials examining you have checklists, criteria developed over centuries of imperial practice. They check your teeth like your livestock at market, which, functionally, you are. They examine your skin for blemishes, scars, or signs of disease. They assess your posture, your build, your potential for beauty. One man lifts your chin and stares into your eyes with the detached interest of someone evaluating breeding stock. Another examines your hands, checking that your fingers are long and delicate enough for palace life. But here's the truly insidious part. They're not just looking for pretty children. They're looking for intelligent ones. The Ottoman imperial harem wasn't a collection of mindless sex slaves. It was a sophisticated political institution that required cunning, educated women capable of navigating Byzantine court intrigue. They want girls who show promise of becoming the kind of women who could influence policy, manage vast household economies, and raise future sultans. So when you answer their questions quickly and clearly, when you demonstrate that you can count and that you understand the stories your grandmother told you about faraway places, you're not saving yourself, you're sealing your fate. The official in charge nods and makes a mark next to your name on his list. Congratulations, you've just passed the entrance exam for a life of sexual slavery. Your prize? A one-way journey to Istanbul, and a future where your greatest achievement will be determined by your ability to please a man you've never met. Your parents receive compensation, of course. The Ottoman Empire isn't in the business of stealing children without proper paperwork. They're given coins, enough to ease the sting of losing their daughter forever. Some historians romanticize this as opportunity. Your family receives money, and you receive education and a chance at wealth and power. But you're 8 years old, and you're about to be taken from everything you've ever known to be trained as a sexual commodity for the most powerful man in the world. Your mother isn't allowed to cry openly. That would be seen as ingratitude toward the Sultan's generous offer. But you see the tears she's holding back, and you don't understand why she looks like someone just died. You don't understand that someone just did. The child you were, the life you might have lived, The choice you'll never have to determine your own destiny. All of it dies in that dusty village square. The journey to Istanbul takes weeks. You're travelling with dozens of other girls, all of varying ages, all torn from their families for the same purpose. The older girls try to explain what's happening, but their explanations are a mixture of terror and desperate optimism. We're going to live in a palace, they say. We'll wear silk and eat exotic foods, and maybe become rich and powerful. What they don't tell you, what they can't bring themselves to acknowledge, is that you're heading toward a system designed to pit women against each other in a desperate competition for survival, where your worth is measured entirely by your ability to sexually satisfy a man who owns hundreds of other women just like you. The caravan stops each night, and you sleep on hard ground under stars that no longer feel like the same stars that shone over your village. The guards are professional and efficient, but they're not cruel. Why would they be? You're valuable cargo now, future investments in the imperial household. Damaging you would be like scratching a precious gemstone. You eat unfamiliar foods and hear languages you don't recognize. Some of the older girls teach you basic Turkish phrases, the beginnings of your transformation from whoever you used to be into whoever the empire needs you to become. You practice saying "Evet, Sultanım," yes, my sultan, until the words feel natural in your mouth. At night, huddled together for warmth and comfort, you and the other girls create a temporary family. You share stories about your homes, your parents, your pet goats or dogs or chickens. These conversations become more precious than gold, because you're beginning to understand, with the sharp intuition that children possess, that these memories might be all you have left of your old life. The girl next to you, maybe a year older, from a village near the Black Sea, tells you about how her grandmother used to braid flowers into her hair during spring festivals. Another girl describes her father's fishing boat and the songs he would sing while mending nets. These stories become a form of resistance, a way of preserving pieces of yourselves before the empire systematically erases them. But as Istanbul's walls appear on the horizon, growing larger and more imposing with each day of travel, those stories begin to feel like tales from another world. Because that's exactly what they are. The Topkapi Palace complex is breathtaking, and that's the first sign that your life just got infinitely more complicated. When something looks this beautiful from the outside, it usually means the interior horrors are proportionally sophisticated. You're not entering a dungeon with rats and chains. You're entering a system so elegant and refined that it will destroy your agency while making you grateful for the privilege. The imperial harem occupies an entire section of the palace, a maze of courtyards, gardens, baths, and chambers that houses anywhere from 400 to 1,500 women, depending on the sultan's current interests and the empire's financial situation. It's a city within a city, a complete ecosystem designed around the care, feeding, education, and sexual availability of women for one man's pleasure. Your first glimpse of the harem comes through a set of massive doors guarded by African eunuchs. These men are not decorative palace accessories. They're highly trained administrators who've undergone surgical procedures that make them safe to interact with the sultan's women. The fact that grown men had their genitals removed with crude medieval surgical techniques just so they could supervise your captivity tells you everything you need to know about how seriously the empire takes the concept of sexual ownership. The chief black eunuch, the Kislar Agazi, examines your group with the practiced eye of someone who's processed thousands of young women. He's often the third most powerful person in the entire empire, after the Sultan and the Grand Vizier. His authority comes from managing the Sultan's most intimate possessions, which now includes you. You're separated from the older girls immediately. The Ottoman system is methodical in its approach to human trafficking. Different ages require different training programs, and they've had centuries to perfect the process. You're assigned to the novice quarters, where you'll spend the next several years learning to be a proper concubine. The accommodations are genuinely beautiful, which makes everything worse. Your sleeping area features intricate tile work, soft carpets, and windows that overlook perfectly manicured gardens. It's like being imprisoned in a 5-star hotel designed by someone with exquisite taste and a complete disregard for human freedom. The message is clear: the empire can afford to give you beauty, comfort, and luxury precisely because they own you completely. Your new mother is an older concubine named Gulnar, which means pomegranate flower. She's maybe 30, which in concubine years makes her practically ancient. She's survived the harem politics long enough to be assigned educational duties, which means she was either exceptionally clever, exceptionally lucky, or exceptionally good at making other women disappear, possibly all three. Gulnar explains the hierarchy with the patience of someone who's had this conversation hundreds of times. At the bottom are the Asimi novices like you. Above them are the Shagird, apprentice concubines who've completed basic training. Next come the Gadikli, salaried concubines who've proven their worth, but haven't yet attracted the Sultan's attention. Above them are the Iqbal, those who've shared the Sultan's bed at least once. At the pinnacle are the Kadin Effendi, the handful of women who've borne the Sultan children and achieved the closest thing to security available in this system. And ruling over all of them is the Valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother, a woman who started exactly where you are now and climbed to the peak of the empire's power structure by successfully navigating every level of this female hierarchy. She's proof that the system occasionally rewards women with real power, which makes it even more insidious, because it gives everyone just enough hope to keep playing the game. Your daily schedule begins before dawn with prayers. The empire may have stolen you from your family and enslaved you for sexual purposes, but they're very concerned about your spiritual development. You'll pray 5 times a day, every day, for the rest of your life. These prayers serve multiple purposes. They reinforce submission to authority, they create routine and structure, and they remind you that God apparently wants you to be here. After prayers comes education, because an ignorant concubine is a useless concubine. You learn to read and write in Turkish, Arabic and Persian. You study poetry, music and mathematics. You memorize the genealogies of the Ottoman royal family going back generations. You learn the proper forms of address for every level of court hierarchy, because using the wrong title could get you beaten or killed. But the real education is in the unspoken curriculum. You learn to read facial expressions and body language with the precision of a CIA analyst. You develop the ability to sense shifting alliances and political undercurrents in conversations about seemingly innocent topics, like the weather or the quality of the morning's bread. You master the art of being simultaneously invisible and memorable, depending on what the moment requires. Language lessons are particularly surreal. You're sitting in a beautiful chamber learning verb conjugations, while outside the windows, gardeners tend to flowers that cost more than your entire village's annual income. Your teacher, another concubine who's worked her way up to educational duties, drills you on vocabulary, while casually mentioning that the girl who used to sit in your spot was strangled last month for allegedly speaking disrespectfully about the Sultan's favourite horse. Repeat after me, she says with a pleasant smile. Ben sizing colonisdim, I am your slave. The words taste like copper in your mouth, but you repeat them until they sound natural. Because they need to sound natural. Your life depends on your ability to internalize your own dehumanization so completely that it becomes second nature. The other girls in your group are going through the same process, but everyone responds differently. Some retreat into silent compliance, becoming perfect automatons who follow every rule and never express an independent thought. Others develop elaborate fantasy lives, creating rich internal worlds where they're still free. A few begin planning escape attempts that they'll never actually attempt because the consequences would be too horrific to contemplate. You fall somewhere in the middle, learning to present a facade of compliance while carefully guarding your inner thoughts. It's a survival strategy that will serve you well, but it's also slowly splitting you into two people: the obedient concubine, the empire wants you to be, and the girl from the village who still exists somewhere deep inside, growing smaller and quieter every day. The harem has its own economy, its own social structure, its own politics. Older concubines mentor younger ones in exchange for loyalty and service. Factions form around different mothers of potential heirs. Information becomes currency, and the ability to keep secrets becomes more valuable than gold. You're not just learning to be a sex slave, you're learning to navigate a complex political system where the stakes are life and death, and the rules change depending on who's in favour this week. Every evening, after your lessons and duties are complete, you're allowed a brief period of recreation. The older girls gather to sew, gossip, and share news from the outside world that filters in through the servants and eunuchs. These conversations are your only connection to reality beyond the palace walls, and they're strictly monitored. Speaking too fondly of your old life is discouraged. Expressing any desire to leave is forbidden. Even admitting that you miss your family is considered a sign of insufficient gratitude for your current circumstances. But in the darkness after the lamps are extinguished, when the guards assume everyone is sleeping, whispered conversations continue. Girls share memories of their homes, their families, their old lives. They create elaborate stories about what they'll do if they ever escape. Though everyone knows escape is impossible, the palace is surrounded by walls, guards, and the city of Istanbul itself. Even if you could somehow get out, where would you go? You're hundreds of miles from home. You have no money, no connections, and no skills that would allow you to survive in the outside world. This is the genius of the system. It's not just physical imprisonment, it's psychological architecture, designed to make freedom seem impossible, even if it were offered. You're being systematically conditioned to accept that your only path to safety, comfort, and meaning lies in succeeding within the harem hierarchy. Resistance becomes not just futile, but literally unthinkable. As you drift off to sleep in your luxurious prison, you can hear the night sounds of the palace, guards walking their rounds, water flowing in the fountains, the distant sound of music from the Sultan's quarters, where he's being entertained by women who graduated from your training program years ago. These sounds become the soundtrack to your dreams, replacing the familiar nighttime symphony of your village. The sounds of crickets, wind through grain fields, your father's snoring from the next room. You're learning to sleep in silk while your soul slowly suffocates. 6 months into your new life, you've learnt enough Turkish to understand when people are talking about you, which turns out to be a mixed blessing. Knowledge, as always, comes with a price, and in your case, that price is the horrifying realization of exactly how systematically your personhood is being dismantled and rebuilt. Your days now follow a rigid schedule designed to transform you from a village child into an imperial sex object, but it's done with such bureaucratic efficiency that it feels almost respectable. Almost. The Ottoman Empire doesn't just want your body, they want to sculpt your mind, your tastes, your very sense of self, until you become the perfect accessory for absolute power. Morning lessons begin with deportment training. You learn to walk with a particular glide that makes your silk robes flow elegantly around your ankles. This isn't ballet class, this is engineering your movement to be maximally appealing to a man whose sexual preferences determine the fate of millions. You practice sitting gracefully, rising without making noise, and bowing with exactly the right degree of submission. Too little suggests disrespect. Too much suggests mockery. Your instructor, Hatice Hanım, is a former concubine who never quite made it to the Sultan's bed, but earned enough favour to become a teacher. She demonstrates each movement with the precision of someone whose life once depended on getting these details exactly right. Your body must become poetry, she explains, while adjusting your posture with firm hands. Every gesture should suggest availability without seeming eager, beauty without vanity, intelligence without threatening his superiority. The contradiction is deliberate and maddening. You're supposed to be educated enough to converse intelligently, but not so educated that you might question your circumstances. Beautiful enough to inspire desire, but not so beautiful that you overshadow other women. Confident enough to be interesting, but submissive enough to be safe. It's like being asked to perform calculus while walking a tightrope over crocodiles. Language instruction has evolved beyond basic vocabulary into something more sinister, the systematic replacement of your original thoughts with approved thoughts. You learn not just Turkish, Arabic, and Persian, but the specific dialects, accents, and speaking patterns that mark someone as properly educated within the imperial system. Your village accent is systematically corrected until even you can hear how crude and peasant-like it sounds. More insidiously, you're learning to think in these new languages. The words you use to understand your own experiences are being replaced with words that carry different meanings, different assumptions about what's normal and acceptable. In Turkish, you're not a kidnapped child, you're a chosen one, blessed with opportunity. You're not enslaved, you're honoured with service. You're not being trained for sexual exploitation, you're preparing for potential elevation. The Empire has spent centuries perfecting this linguistic reprogramming, because they understand something modern psychologists are just beginning to grasp. Control the language someone uses to think about their situation, and you control how they understand that situation. Every day, your original vocabulary for concepts like freedom, choice, and family becomes a little rustier, a little harder to access. Mathematics lessons focus on practical skills you'll need if you rise high enough in the hierarchy to manage household accounts. You learn to calculate the costs of different fabrics, the proper ratios for mixing perfumes, and how to manage the complex payment systems that keep the harem functioning. These aren't abstract mathematical concepts, they're the tools you'll need to administrate a portion of the empire's domestic economy. But even mathematics becomes a form of indoctrination. Word problems invariably involve scenarios where your happiness depends on pleasing your superiors. If the Sultan requests entertainment for 40 guests, and each performer costs 15 akçe, how much should you budget? The math is straightforward, but the underlying message is constant. Your intelligence exists to serve his pleasure. Music and dance instruction begins simply, but quickly becomes sophisticated. You learn to play the oud, the ney, and various forms of percussion. But you're not learning music for your own enjoyment. You're learning to create atmosphere, to provide entertainment that enhances the Sultan's experiences without competing for his attention. Your musical development is calibrated to his tastes, his cultural preferences, his personal history, with various melodies and rhythms. Dance training is even more explicitly sexual, though it's presented with such artistic sophistication that it takes months before you fully understand what you're learning. The movements are beautiful, graceful, mesmerizing, and designed to display your body in ways that will inspire desire while maintaining a veneer of respectability. You're learning to seduce while appearing innocent, to suggest availability while maintaining mystery. Your dance instructor, Aisha Kalfa, is a master of her craft and utterly terrifying in her matter-of-fact approach to your sexual education. This movement, she says, demonstrating a particular hip rotation, suggests fertility and health. Practice until it's unconscious. She adjusts your arms with clinical precision. The Sultan should be able to imagine touching you without you appearing to invite such thoughts. The psychological complexity required to perform this dance is staggering. You must simultaneously embody sexuality and innocence, invitation and restraint, sophistication and natural simplicity. It's like being asked to be fire and ice at the same moment, and the fact that you're gradually becoming capable of this contradiction terrifies you almost as much as anything else about your situation. Afternoon lessons focus on cultural sophistication. You memorize poetry that celebrates the glory of the Ottoman Empire, the wisdom of the Sultan, and the honor of serving the imperial household. You study the proper appreciation of music, art and literature. You learn to recognize the difference between Chinese and Japanese silk, between Persian and Turkish carpet patterns, between different grades of frankincense and myrrh. This cultural education serves multiple purposes. It makes you a more interesting companion for a man whose conversations might range from military strategy to artistic criticism. It ensures that you can properly appreciate and care for the luxury items that surround you, and it reinforces your understanding of the empire's cultural supremacy, its right to command the best of everything, including you. But perhaps most importantly, this cultural education creates distance between you and your origins. As you develop refined tastes and sophisticated knowledge, your village life begins to seem crude and primitive by comparison. The empire isn't just taking your body, it's making you complicit in the erasure of your own cultural identity. Religious instruction occupies several hours daily and represents one of the most psychologically complex aspects of your training. You're learning Islamic theology and practice, but you're learning it through the specific lens of Ottoman imperial ideology. Allah, you're taught, has ordained the social hierarchy that places the Sultan at the apex of earthly power. Your position within the harem is part of divine plan, a test of your faith and submission. The religious education is genuinely comprehensive. You study the Quran, Hadith literature, and Islamic jurisprudence. You learn the philosophical foundations of Islamic civilization and the empire's role as defender of the faith. This isn't superficial indoctrination, it's serious theological education that would be impressive in any context. But it's also systematic psychological manipulation designed to make you interpret your enslavement as spiritual opportunity. Every aspect of your situation is framed in terms of Islamic concepts like submission to Allah's will, gratitude for divine blessings, and the rewards that await the faithful in the afterlife. Your suffering becomes a form of worship. Your compliance becomes faith. The most insidious part is that much of this religious instruction is genuinely beautiful and spiritually meaningful. Islamic civilization has produced some of humanity's greatest achievements in philosophy, art, and ethics. You're being exposed to intellectual traditions that are profound and moving, but this beauty is being used as a delivery system for ideas that justify your exploitation. Evening study sessions focus on history and politics, but like everything else, these subjects are filtered through the lens of imperial ideology. You learn about the Ottoman Empire's glorious conquests, its role as successor to the Roman Empire, its destiny to unite the world under Islamic rule. You study the genealogies of the royal family, the great military victories, the cultural achievements that demonstrate Ottoman superiority, but you also learn practical politics, how the empire actually functions, how decisions are made, how power flows through the imperial system. This knowledge is necessary because if you rise high enough in the harem hierarchy, you might find yourself involved in actual governance. The Valid Sultan often functions as an unofficial advisor to her son, and the mothers of potential heirs become political players in their own right. This political education creates another layer of psychological complexity. You're learning about the empire's greatness while simultaneously experiencing its brutality firsthand. You study how the Ottoman system brings order and prosperity to vast territories while living as proof of that system's willingness to treat human beings as property. The cognitive dissonance is intentional. The empire wants you to understand both the system's power and your own powerlessness within it. Knowledge becomes another form of control. The more you understand about how the empire functions, the more clearly you see that resistance is futile and accommodation is your only path to survival. Your fellow students are going through the same process, but everyone copes differently. Some throw themselves into their studies with desperate enthusiasm, hoping that excellence will provide protection. Others develop a kind of intellectual numbness, learning what they need to learn without allowing themselves to think about what they're really preparing for. You find yourself becoming genuinely interested in some subjects, despite their context. The poetry is often beautiful, the history is fascinating, and the cultural knowledge opens up new ways of understanding the world. But every moment of genuine learning is tainted by the awareness that you're being educated to be a more sophisticated slave. As the months pass, you begin to notice changes in yourself that go beyond acquired knowledge. Your tastes are shifting. The foods you once loved seem simple and unsophisticated compared to the complex flavors of palace cuisine. Your village dialect sounds crude to your newly educated ears. Even your memories of home begin to seem like scenes from someone else's life. This is the most successful aspect of the imperial education system. It doesn't just teach you to serve the empire, it makes you want to belong to it. By the time your basic training is complete, returning to your village would feel like exile rather than liberation. The empire has colonized not just your body, but your very conception of what constitutes a good life. You're becoming exactly what they want you to become. A woman whose intelligence, beauty, and cultural sophistication make her a worthy companion for unlimited power, and whose dependence on the imperial system makes her absolutely reliable. You're transforming into a person who will compete desperately for the attention of a man who could have you killed for looking at him wrong, and you'll do it with genuine enthusiasm because the alternative is to acknowledge that your entire existence has become a lie. The education is almost complete. Soon you'll graduate to the next level of the harem hierarchy, where the real competition begins. Everything you've learned so far has been preparation. Now comes the test that will determine whether you live or die, succeed or disappear, become a footnote in history or the mother of sultans. Your childhood is officially over. Your education is nearly complete. Your life as a concubine is about to begin in earnest. 2 years into your palace imprisonment, you've mastered the basics of being an attractive, educated slave. Congratulations. Your reward is promotion to the next level of an hierarchy, so complex that it makes corporate org charts look like children's picture books. Welcome to the ranks of the Shaygird apprentice concubines, where you'll discover that everything you thought you understood about your situation was adorably naive. The harem hierarchy isn't just about ranking women by their proximity to the sultan's penis. It's a sophisticated political system that manages the most dangerous concentration of feminine ambition in human history. When you lock up hundreds of intelligent, educated women and tell them that their only path to power runs through one man's bedroom, you create a pressure cooker of competition that makes Game of Thrones look like a friendly neighborhood barbecue. As a newly promoted Shaygird, you're assigned a small private chamber. your first taste of individual space since arriving at the palace. It's barely larger than a closet, but it contains a bed, a writing desk, and a window that looks out onto one of the harem's interior gardens. This isn't kindness, it's strategy. Privacy becomes a privilege you can lose, making you desperate to maintain your current status while working toward advancement. Your chambermate is Zainab, a girl from Crete who arrived a year before you. She's 17 now, practically ancient by harem standards, and her failure to advance beyond shagird status makes her a living cautionary tale. She explains the realities of your new position with the bitter wisdom of someone who's watched dozens of younger girls pass her by on their way to higher ranks. The Gedikli look down on us, she explains while braiding your hair in the elaborate style required for your rank. The Iqbal pretend we don't exist, and the Kadhan Effendi consider us furniture. She tugs a strand too tight, and you wince. But the real danger comes from other shagird. We're all competing for the same limited opportunities, and friendship is a luxury none of us can afford. The mathematics of harem advancement are brutally simple. The Sultan might sleep with 4 or 5 different women per month, if he's feeling particularly energetic. Most months, he focuses on current favourites, or chooses based on political considerations that have nothing to do with personal preference. In a harem of several hundred women, your chances of ever being selected for the Sultan's bed are roughly equivalent to winning a modern lottery while being struck by lightning. But hope is the cruelest drug the Empire distributes, and they're very generous with the dosage. Every promotion in rank, every small privilege granted, every story about a former slave who became Valide Sultan feeds the fantasy that exceptional performance might overcome impossible odds. You're like lab rats in an experiment where the reward is randomly distributed, making you try harder rather than giving up. Your new responsibilities as a shagird include serving the higher-ranking concubines with the kind of attention usually reserved for religious relics. You help Gedikli women dress each morning, arranging their elaborate costumes with the precision of museum curators. You serve tea during their afternoon conversations, standing motionless for hours while they discuss politics, gossip, and the relative merits of different perfumes. But the real education comes from observing how these women interact with each other. The surface appears civilized, polite conversations, shared meals, collaborative artistic projects. Underneath, every gesture carries coded messages, every compliment contains subtle insults, and every friendly suggestion might be a carefully placed trap designed to eliminate competition. Hatis Kadhan, one of the Sultan's current favourites and mother to his youngest son, holds court each afternoon in the harem's most beautiful reception room. As a shagird, you're occasionally permitted to attend these gatherings, serving refreshments while the Empire's most powerful women conduct their informal business. You watch Hatis navigate conversations like a chess master playing multiple games simultaneously. She offers sympathetic advice to a Gedikli woman struggling with illness, while subtly undermining the woman's confidence and ensuring that her medical condition becomes common knowledge. She praises a young Iqbal's musical performance while making suggestions that will lead the girl to make choices that displease the Sultan. The sophistication is breathtaking and terrifying. These women have transformed interpersonal manipulation into high art, developing techniques for destroying rivals that are so subtle the victims often thank them for their help. You're watching masters of psychological warfare conduct operations that would impress intelligence agencies. But you're also watching women who've been driven to this behaviour by a system that offers them no alternative paths to security or power. Hatis Kadhan wasn't born a scheming manipulator. She was created by an empire that told her that her value depended entirely on maintaining one man's interest, while surrounded by hundreds of women trying to achieve the same goal. Your duties expand to include more personal service for the higher ranks. You learn to prepare elaborate baths, scented with rosewater and jasmine, to arrange flowers in patterns that conform to court aesthetics, and to serve meals with the kind of precision that makes 5-star restaurants look casual. Every task is performed under observation, and every mistake is carefully noted by women who understand that your failure might create opportunities for their protégés. The bath duties are particularly educational, in the worst possible way. You assist as Gedikli and Iqbal women undergo beauty rituals that would bankrupt small kingdoms. Their skin is scrubbed with pumice and oiled with rare unguents imported from India and Arabia. Their hair is washed with formulations that take hours to apply correctly. Their nails are painted with dyes that cost more per ounce than most people see in a lifetime. But you also see the scars. Nearly every woman bears marks from beauty treatments that went wrong, burns from experimental hair removal techniques, infections from cosmetic procedures, permanent discoloration from toxic makeup ingredients. The pursuit of perfect beauty for the Sultan's pleasure leaves its own form of battle damage, and you're looking at your own future written in scar tissue and chemical burns. The most successful women have learnt to weaponize beauty itself. They share tips and techniques with carefully chosen allies, while providing subtly wrong advice to potential rivals. This particular henna will make your hair shine beautifully, one Iqbal tells a competing Gidikli, failing to mention that the formula also contains ingredients that will cause severe allergic reactions in women with certain skin types. You begin to understand that every woman in the harem exists in a constant state of low-level warfare, fighting battles with weapons made of gossip, beauty tips, religious interpretations, and strategic friendships. The empire has created a system where women destroy each other with smiles, ensuring that their collective intelligence and ambition is channeled into mutual destruction rather than organized resistance. Your own advancement depends on navigating this battlefield while somehow maintaining your sanity and your soul. You need allies, but every friendship is potentially a betrayal waiting to happen. You need to demonstrate ambition, but not so much that you threaten women who could destroy you. You need to be memorable enough to attract positive attention, but not so memorable that you inspire jealousy in the wrong people. The pressure creates its own form of psychological damage. You find yourself analyzing every conversation for hidden meanings, every friendly gesture for concealed threats. Simple interactions become exhausting exercises in strategic thinking. A casual compliment about your embroidery skills might be genuine praise, a setup for future manipulation, or a warning that you're attracting the wrong kind of attention. Sleep becomes elusive because your mind won't stop processing the day's social interactions, looking for missed signals or unrecognized dangers. You lie awake replaying conversations, wondering if you said too much or too little, if you aligned yourself with the right faction or inadvertently insulted someone whose enmity could end your life. The psychological toll manifests in physical symptoms. Your hands develop a tremor that appears during important conversations. Your stomach churns constantly, making it difficult to appreciate the elaborate meals that surround you. Your hair begins falling out in small clumps, a common occurrence in the harem that everyone politely ignores, because acknowledging stress-related illness would suggest that paradise isn't quite as perfect as advertised. But perhaps the most insidious change is how you begin to internalize the logic of the system. When a rival makes a mistake that leads to her demotion, you feel a surge of satisfaction that horrifies you. When a friend receives positive attention that you wanted for yourself, you catch yourself looking for ways to undermine her success. The empire is transforming you into exactly the kind of person you would have despised in your previous life. Monthly examinations become a central feature of your existence. The palace physicians inspect every shaggird for signs of illness, pregnancy, or physical changes that might affect your value. These medical evaluations are presented as healthcare, but they're actually quality control inspections designed to maintain the Sultan's property in optimal condition. Dr. Mehmet Effendi, the chief palace physician, examines you with the clinical detachment of someone evaluating livestock. He checks your teeth, your skin, your muscle tone, and your overall physical development. Every aspect of your body is assessed for its potential appeal to the Sultan, and detailed notes are made in your permanent record. But the examinations also serve a more sinister purpose. They're opportunities for the medical staff to identify and eliminate problematic women before they can cause trouble. A diagnosis of chronic illness might lead to your quiet removal from the harem. Evidence of mental instability could result in permanent assignment to menial duties. Even showing too much intelligence during medical conversations might be noted as a potential concern. You learn to present exactly the right image during these examinations. Healthy, but not threateningly robust. Intelligent, but not dangerously clever. Ambitious, but not insubordinate. It's another performance in a life that's becoming an endless series of auditions for an audience that holds your life in their hands. The reward system is carefully calibrated to maintain hope while minimizing actual advancement. Small privileges are distributed regularly: better food, prettier clothing, access to improved quarters, creating the illusion of upward mobility while keeping everyone trapped in the same fundamental situation. You're like a hamster on a wheel, running frantically while going nowhere. But occasionally, very rarely, someone actually advances to Gedikli status. When this happens, the entire harem buzzes with excitement and speculation. The promoted woman becomes a living example that advancement is possible, inspiring everyone else to work harder while simultaneously creating a new source of jealousy and resentment. Fatma, a girl from your original group, receives promotion to Gedikli after demonstrating exceptional skill in calligraphy and Persian poetry. The announcement comes during the morning assembly, and you watch her face transform from disbelief to carefully controlled joy. She's achieved something genuinely significant: a salary, better quarters, and most importantly, eligibility for the Sultan's attention. But promotion also means immediate isolation from her former friends and allies. Gedikli women inhabit a different social sphere, with different responsibilities and different dangers. Fatma must now compete against women who've spent years perfecting the skills she's just beginning to develop. Her advancement becomes a form of exile, disguised as success. You congratulate her with genuine happiness mixed with seething envy, and you hate yourself for both emotions. The Empire has trained you to feel competitive rather than supportive toward other women, and every promotion by a friend becomes a reminder of your own stagnation. The system has made you complicit in your own oppression by turning solidarity into a luxury you can't afford. The seasonal rhythms of palace life provide structure, but also highlight the passage of time that you're losing to this existence. Spring brings new arrivals, fresh groups of young girls who make you feel ancient, despite being barely 15 yourself. Summer intensifies the competition as the Sultan spends more time in the harem gardens, increasing opportunities for chance encounters. Autumn brings political uncertainties as military campaigns conclude and policy decisions affect the imperial household. Winter creates intimacy as everyone retreats indoors, leading to both closer friendships and more intense rivalries. Each season that passes represents another year stolen from the life you might have lived. You calculate obsessively. If you'd stayed in your village, you might be married by now, possibly with children of your own. You might be helping your parents manage their household, participating in community festivals, making choices about your own future. Instead, you're competing for the attention of a man you've never met, who might or might not find you interesting enough to rape. The mathematical certainty of your situation becomes increasingly clear as you mature. Even if you advance to Gedikli status, even if you somehow catch the Sultan's attention, even if you bear him a child, your entire life will still revolve around maintaining the interest of one person whose attention could shift to someone else at any moment. You're not climbing toward freedom, you're climbing toward a more comfortable form of slavery. But the alternative to climbing is disappearing entirely. Women who fail to advance through the ranks don't retire gracefully to comfortable pensions. They're quietly reassigned to menial duties, essentially becoming servants to the women they once competed alongside. Some are sent to serve in provincial households, others are married off to minor officials, and some simply vanish from the palace records entirely. The threat of failure keeps everyone struggling toward a success that might be worse than failure itself. You're caught in a system that offers no good choices, only different forms of exploitation dressed up as opportunities. The Empire has created the perfect trap, a hierarchy so elaborate and competitive that its victims collaborate enthusiastically in their own oppression. As your second year as a shagird draws to a close, you understand that you're approaching a crucial decision point. You can continue competing for advancement, accepting the psychological damage and moral compromises that success requires. You can allow yourself to fade into the background, accepting a life of service to more ambitious women. Or you can begin planning something that nobody talks about but everyone thinks about: escape. But escape planning, in the Ottoman imperial harem, isn't like escaping from a conventional prison. You're not just confined by walls and guards, you're trapped by your own education, your acquired tastes, your emotional dependencies, and your complete lack of survival skills for the outside world. The Empire has systematically eliminated your ability to imagine a life beyond palace walls. Still, as you fall asleep in your small chamber, listening to Zainab's quiet crying in the bed next to yours, you allow yourself to dream of impossible things: freedom, choice, a life where your value isn't measured by your ability to please men who see you as property. These dreams are dangerous because they make your current situation unbearable, but they're also the only thing keeping your soul alive in a system designed to kill it. Tomorrow will bring another day of competition, manipulation, and psychological warfare disguised as education and opportunity. But tonight, in the darkness before dawn, you can still remember that you used to be a person with your own name, your own family, your own future. That person is getting smaller and quieter every day, but she's not dead yet. Not yet. 3 years have passed since you entered the palace, and you've finally achieved what passes for success in this gilded nightmare. Promotion to Gedikli status. You now receive a monthly salary of 40 akçe, have your own private chamber with actual furniture, and are eligible for the Sultan's attention. Congratulations! Your reward for years of psychological torture is the opportunity to compete in the major leagues of sexual slavery. The transition from Şırgırd to Gedikli feels like moving from amateur hour to professional athletics. If professional athletics involved potentially lethal consequences for losing, the women at this level have spent years honing their skills in manipulation, seduction, and survival. They're not just beautiful and educated, they're tactical geniuses who've learned to weaponize everything from poetry to perfume in their quest for the Sultan's attention. Your new quarters reflect your elevated status in ways both meaningful and deeply troubling. The chamber includes a sitting area with cushions covered in silk brocade, a carved wooden chest for your expanding wardrobe, and most significantly, a small window that looks out onto the Sultan's private gardens. This view isn't just a luxury, it's intelligence. You can now observe the Sultan's movements, his preferences for different outdoor activities, his routine habits that might suggest optimal timing for accidental encounters. But the window also serves as a constant reminder of your proximity to absolute power and the dangers that accompany it. Sometimes you see the Sultan walking with his advisors, discussing matters of state that affect millions of lives. Sometimes you see him relaxing with his current favorites, women who've achieved the summit of harem hierarchy. And sometimes you see the gardeners removing evidence of what happens to women who displease him, bloodstains that need to be washed from marble walkways, sections of garden that require sudden landscaping improvements. Your roommate situation has been upgraded as well. Layla is a 20-year-old Gedikli from Georgia, who's been at this level for 2 years without advancement. She's beautiful, intelligent, cultured, and absolutely terrified that her failure to attract the Sultan's attention means she's aging out of relevance. At 20, she's practically elderly by harem standards, and every day that passes without royal notice brings her closer to irrelevance. The Sultan prefers novelty, she explains while applying a face mask made from crushed pearls and honey, a beauty treatment that costs more than most people's annual income. New faces, new bodies, new conversations. Women like us have perhaps 2 years to make an impression before we become invisible. She spreads the pearl mixture with practiced precision. After that, we become servants to the women who succeed where we failed. The mathematics of your situation are becoming clearer and more terrifying. The Sultan is currently 38 years old and has been ruling for 15 years. His harem contains approximately 800 women at various levels of hierarchy. His sexual habits, according to carefully gathered intelligence, involve sleeping with perhaps 4 to 6 different women per month, with most of his attention focused on a core group of 10 to 12 current favorites. Basic arithmetic suggests that even if you immediately join the rotation of women receiving royal attention, you might expect to sleep with the Sultan perhaps 6 to 8 times per year. Success in the harem isn't measured by love, affection, or even regular sexual attention. It's measured by your ability to become pregnant during those brief encounters and to bear male children who might someday inherit the throne. But before any of this mathematical possibility can become reality, you need to catch the Sultan's attention in the first place. This is where the real artistry of harem politics begins, and where women like Layla have been failing for years despite possessing every apparent qualification for success. The competition for royal notice operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Physical beauty is obviously important, but it's table stakes. Every woman at Gedikli level is physically stunning by any reasonable standard. Intelligence and education matter, but again, everyone has received the same comprehensive training. The real differentiator is strategic thinking, combined with what can only be described as performance art. You study the women who've successfully attracted the Sultan's attention, looking for patterns that might guide your own efforts. Ayşe Iqbal, who recently gave birth to a prince, originally caught royal notice by composing an original poem that perfectly captured the Sultan's mood after a difficult military campaign. Fatma Iqbal earned her position by demonstrating exceptional skill in chess during a period when the Sultan was obsessed with strategic games. Hatis Kadin, the current favourite, reportedly gained initial access by claiming to have prophetic dreams about Ottoman military victories. The key insight is that the Sultan isn't just choosing sexual partners. He's curating a collection of interesting women who can provide entertainment, intellectual stimulation, and ego reinforcement, in addition to physical pleasure. Your challenge is to identify what kind of woman he currently finds most compelling, and then transform yourself into that person, while competing against hundreds of other women trying to perform the same analysis and transformation. This level of strategic self-reinvention requires psychological flexibility that borders on multiple personality disorder. You must maintain enough authentic personality to be genuinely interesting while simultaneously performing whatever role seems most likely to attract royal attention. It's like being an actress who has to improvise a character based on incomplete script notes while competing for the part against every other actress in the empire. Your daily routine now includes advanced courses in seduction that are presented as cultural education but function as masterclasses in psychological manipulation. You learn to read facial expressions and body language with forensic precision. You study the art of conversation that appears spontaneous while actually following carefully planned scripts designed to elicit specific emotional responses. Gul Bahar Hanum, your new instructor, and a former Iqbal who bore the Sultan 2 daughters, teaches these advanced techniques with the clinical precision of a military strategist. Seduction is architecture, she explains while demonstrating proper eye contact techniques. You must construct an experience that feels natural while actually controlling every element. He should believe that his interest in you is spontaneous desire when it's actually the result of careful engineering. You practice creating accidental encounters that appear to be chance meetings, but actually require weeks of planning and intelligence gathering. You learn to position yourself in locations where the Sultan is likely to pass, to time your activities to coincide with his schedule, and to create situations where natural conversation might develop. Every gesture, every word, every apparent coincidence becomes part of an elaborate performance designed to simulate authenticity. The irony is staggering. You're learning to fake sincerity so convincingly that you begin to lose track of what genuine emotion feels like. The woman you're becoming is a carefully constructed performance designed to appeal to one man's fantasies, and the scary part is that the performance is becoming more real than the person underneath it. But the most sophisticated aspect of harem politics operates at the level of faction management and alliance building. Individual talent might get you noticed, but long-term survival requires understanding the complex web of relationships, dependencies, and power structures that actually control access to the Sultan. The harem's informal government operates through a series of interconnected factions built around successful mothers and their allies. Hatis Kadin controls the largest and most powerful faction because she's the mother of the Sultan's most promising heir. But her position also makes her the primary target for every other ambitious woman in the palace. Supporting her offers protection and access, but also makes you a target for her enemies. Alternatively, you could align yourself with Gulsha Kadin, who represents the more intellectual faction within the harem. Her influence comes from her role as an unofficial advisor on cultural and religious matters, rather than from maternal success. Joining her faction offers different opportunities, but also different risks, particularly if the Sultan's interests shift away from intellectual pursuits. The most dangerous choice is attempting to remain neutral and independent. Women who try to advance without factional support often find themselves isolated and vulnerable when conflicts arise. But joining any faction means accepting its limitations and making enemies of its rivals. Every choice forecloses other possibilities while creating new dependencies and obligations. You spend weeks analysing the factional landscape before tentatively approaching Aisha Iqbal's circle. She represents a middle path, successful enough to offer genuine protection, not so dominant as to attract constant attacks. Her faction focuses on cultural activities and artistic achievement, areas where your education might provide advantages. But even approaching a faction requires careful strategic planning. You can't simply declare allegiance. That would suggest desperation and weakness. Instead, you must demonstrate value through service, gradually proving your worth until membership is offered rather than requested. It's like applying for admission to an exclusive club, where the membership requirements are secret and the application process could get you killed. Your first opportunity comes when Aisha Iqbal mentions struggling with a complex musical composition she's preparing for the Sultan's birthday celebration. You volunteer your assistance, drawing on your advanced training in music theory to help solve technical problems with the piece. The work is genuinely collaborative and intellectually stimulating, the kind of activity that makes palace life almost bearable. But even this innocent cultural collaboration becomes politically complex. Other factions interpret your assistance as evidence of alignment with Aisha Iqbal's group. Women from competing circles begin treating you with subtle coolness that could escalate into active hostility if you're not careful. Every friendly gesture becomes a political statement with potentially dangerous consequences. The psychological pressure creates its own form of exhaustion. You're simultaneously maintaining your individual advancement efforts, navigating factional politics, managing competitive relationships with other Gedikli women, and performing the constant emotional labor of appearing grateful for your circumstances. It's like playing four-dimensional chess while pretending to enjoy the game. Sleep becomes increasingly elusive as your mind processes the day's social interactions, looking for missed opportunities or unrecognized threats. You dream about conversations that went wrong, about rivals who might be planning your downfall, about the Sultan's preferences and how you might appeal to them. Even your unconscious mind has been colonized by the demands of harem politics. The physical symptoms of chronic stress become more pronounced. Your hands shake during important conversations. You develop headaches that last for days. Your appetite disappears despite being surrounded by the finest cuisine in the empire. Your body is rebelling against the psychological pressure. But acknowledging illness would be seen as weakness that could end your advancement prospects. But perhaps the most disturbing change is how you begin to internalize the logic of the system so completely that you start genuinely believing in your own performance. When you express gratitude for your circumstances, the gratitude starts feeling real. When you compete against other women, the competitive instincts begin feeling natural. When you fantasize about attracting the Sultan's attention, the fantasies become indistinguishable from genuine desire. The empire has succeeded in transforming you into exactly the kind of woman who will collaborate enthusiastically in her own exploitation. You're becoming a person who genuinely wants to win a competition for the privilege of being sexually used by a man who sees you as property. The psychological architecture of your captivity has become the foundation of your identity. But late at night, when the palace is quiet and you're alone with your thoughts, moments of clarity still break through the carefully constructed delusions. You remember your village, your family, your old dreams of a different kind of life. These memories are becoming fainter and harder to access, but they're not completely gone. You're standing at a crossroads, though you may not fully realize it yet. You can continue down the path of advancement, accepting the psychological damage and moral compromises that success requires. You can allow yourself to fade into the background, becoming a supporting character in other women's ambitions. Or you can begin planning something that seems impossible, but might be the only way to save whatever remains of your soul. Escape. But escape planning at your level of the hierarchy involves different calculations than it would have years ago. You now have more privileges to lose, more relationships that might be damaged, more invested identity to abandon. The empire has made you complicit in your own captivity by giving you just enough success to make freedom seem like failure. Still, as you drift off to sleep in your comfortable chamber, listening to the night sounds of the palace, you allow yourself to imagine impossible things. A life where your intelligence serves your own purposes rather than someone else's pleasure. A world where your beauty belongs to you rather than to an empire that sees you as livestock. Dreams of choice, agency, and self-determination. Dangerous thoughts that could get you killed, but might be the only thing keeping you human. Tomorrow will bring another day of competition, manipulation, and performance. But tonight, you can still remember that beneath all the carefully constructed personas, there's still a person who was once free. She's buried deep under years of imperial conditioning, but she's still there, waiting for an opportunity to remind you who you used to be. 4 years, 3 months, and 16 days after entering the palace, your carefully laid plans finally succeed in the most terrifying way possible. The Sultan notices you. Congratulations, you've just won the lottery that everyone dreams about, and nobody actually wants to win. Your prize is the opportunity to discover that your worst nightmares were insufficiently creative. The moment occurs during the Festival of Roses, an annual celebration where the harem's most accomplished women perform for the Sultan's entertainment. You've spent months preparing a musical presentation that combines Persian poetry with Ottoman musical traditions, calculated to appeal to the Sultan's known preferences for sophisticated cultural fusion. The performance goes flawlessly, until you make the mistake of making eye contact with absolute power. The Sultan's gaze feels like being examined by a predator who's deciding whether you're worth the effort of killing. His eyes are intelligent, calculating, and completely devoid of any recognition that you're a human being with thoughts, feelings, or preferences of your own. You're being evaluated like a piece of art that he's considering adding to his collection, and the evaluation process makes your skin crawl even as your training tells you to feel honored. But you hold his gaze for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to demonstrate confidence, brief enough to show proper submission, and you see the moment when his interest shifts from casual observation to active consideration. It's like watching a cat decide to play with a mouse. The predatory attention is unmistakable, and every survival instinct you possess screams at you to run, while your education tells you to feel grateful. The performance concludes, and you retreat with the other women to await the Sultan's verdict on the evening's entertainment. The waiting is almost unbearable because you know that your life has just changed irrevocably, but you don't yet know whether the change will elevate you or destroy you. In the harem hierarchy, royal attention is both the ultimate prize and the most dangerous possible position. Hattis Kadin approaches you during the post-performance reception, her smile as sharp as a blade concealed in silk. "The Sultan seemed to enjoy your presentation," she says with carefully calculated neutrality. "Such talented performances always bring honor to our household." The subtext is clear. You've attracted royal notice, which means you're now a potential threat to her position and the security of her faction. But you've also caught the attention of the Kislar Agassi, whose administrative responsibilities include managing the Sultan's intimate schedule. His approach is more direct and infinitely more terrifying. "The Sultan has expressed interest in your musical education," he says with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing livestock management. "Report to the preparation chambers tomorrow evening after sunset prayers." The preparation chambers. Every woman in the harem knows what this means, though it's discussed only in whispers and euphemisms. You've been selected for the Sultan's bed, and you have less than 24 hours to mentally prepare for an experience that will either elevate you to the ranks of the Iqbal or destroy you completely. There's no middle ground when it comes to royal sexual attention. Your fellow Gedikli women congratulate you with expressions that mix genuine excitement with barely concealed terror. They understand better than anyone what you're about to experience, because they've all been hoping and dreading the same summons. Your success represents possibility for everyone, but it also means that one of their competitors has advanced beyond their reach. Layla helps you pack the few belongings you're allowed to bring to the preparation chambers, her hands shaking slightly as she folds your finest silk robe. "Remember everything we've learnt about pleasing men," she whispers while checking that no one else can hear. "But more importantly, remember that your survival depends on pleasing this particular man in ways that make him want to see you again." The preparation chambers occupy a section of the palace you've never seen before, a suite of rooms designed specifically for readying women for royal attention. The luxury is staggering. Marble baths large enough to swim in, wardrobes filled with garments that cost more than kingdoms, cosmetics imported from the furthest reaches of the empire. But the luxury only makes the underlying purpose more horrifying. You're not alone in preparation. 2 other women have also been selected for the Sultan's consideration. Samil, a recent Circassian arrival, whose pale skin and green eyes apparently appeal to the Sultan's current aesthetic preferences, and Rukiye, a veteran Gedikli, whose musical skills complement your own. The Sultan, it seems, is in the mood for a musical evening with multiple performers. The preparation process takes the entire day and involves beauty rituals, so elaborate they could constitute a form of performance art if they weren't designed to optimize your appeal as a sexual object. Your skin is scrubbed with pumice until it glows, then oiled with rare unguents that leave you smelling like an expensive flower arrangement. Your hair is washed, conditioned, braided, and arranged in a style that will look beautiful while also providing easy access for male hands. But the most intensive preparation is psychological. Gulistan Kalfa, the preparation supervisor and a former favourite who's now too old for royal attention, walks you through the complex etiquette of intimate encounters with unlimited power. Every aspect of the experience is choreographed, from how you should enter the Sultan's chambers to how you should position yourself while waiting for his attention. Never forget that you are performing for an audience of one whose preferences determine whether you live or die, she explains while demonstrating proper posture for various sexual positions. Your pleasure is irrelevant, but your enthusiasm must appear genuine. Your comfort is meaningless, but your beauty must remain undamaged. Your humanity is invisible, but your gratitude must be constant. The instructions are detailed, explicit, and absolutely terrifying. You learn techniques for managing physical discomfort without showing distress, for maintaining attractive expressions during painful experiences, for expressing pleasure you don't feel in ways that appear authentic. It's like being taught to perform emergency surgery on yourself while smiling for photographers. But perhaps most disturbing are the warnings about the Sultan's particular preferences and mood patterns. He apparently enjoys psychological dominance as much as physical control, often testing women's submission through elaborate games of obedience and humiliation. He sometimes requires extensive conversation before and after sexual activity, evaluating women's intelligence and cultural knowledge as carefully as their physical performance. And he has a documented history of becoming violently angry with women who fail to meet his expectations in any aspect of their service. As evening approaches, your terror reaches levels that make previous anxiety seem quaint by comparison. You're about to enter the private chambers of the most powerful man in the world, and your performance over the next few hours will determine whether you rise to unprecedented heights or disappear from palace records entirely. There's no training that can adequately prepare you for the psychological pressure of knowing that your sexual performance is being evaluated by someone who could have you killed for expressing the wrong facial expression. The final stage of preparation involves dressing in garments designed to be beautiful and easily removable. The silk robe flows around your body like liquid starlight, but it's also engineered for rapid disrobing. The jewellery is stunning but positioned so it won't interfere with sexual activity. Even your shoes are selected for their ability to be quickly discarded. Every aspect of your appearance serves the dual purpose of enhancing your beauty and facilitating your sexual availability. The walk to the Sultan's chambers feels like a march to execution, despite being conducted through some of the most beautiful architecture in the world. You pass through courtyards where fountains create symphonies of falling water, galleries where master artists have created visual poetry on walls and ceilings, gardens where the perfume of rare flowers mingles with incense burned in golden braziers. It's like walking through paradise on your way to purgatory. The Sultan's private quarters are beyond anything you've imagined, even after years of exposure to imperial luxury. The chambers are vast, filled with treasures that represent the wealth of continents. Persian carpets cover floors of Italian marble, Chinese porcelain sits alongside Venetian glassware, Ottoman calligraphy shares wall space with illuminated manuscripts from across the Islamic world. You're literally surrounded by the accumulated cultural treasures of human civilization. But all of this beauty serves as backdrop for furniture that makes the chamber's primary purpose unmistakable. The bed is enormous, covered in silk sheets, and surrounded by cushions, arranged for various forms of intimate activity. Side tables hold oils, perfumes, and other accessories for sexual pleasure. The lighting is designed to be flattering to female skin, while providing clear visibility for male appreciation. The Sultan enters wearing a simple robe that somehow makes him more intimidating than full imperial regalia would. He's a man in his late 30s, physically fit and intellectually sharp, accustomed to having every desire immediately satisfied by people whose lives depend on pleasing him. His presence fills the enormous chamber, and you understand viscerally why absolute power corrupts absolutely. When everyone you encounter exists primarily to serve your wants, it becomes impossible to see them as fully human. He greets the three of you with polite formality that somehow makes the situation more terrifying than crude directness would. Ladies, I hope you find my chambers comfortable. Please, make yourselves at ease. The courtesy is genuine, but operates within a framework where your comfort and ease are relevant only insofar as they enhance his pleasure. You're being treated with the same consideration he might show to valuable musical instruments before a concert. The evening begins with conversation that feels surreal in its normalcy. The Sultan discusses poetry, asks about your musical training, shares observations about the festival performance that brought you to his attention. He's genuinely cultured and intellectually engaging, which makes everything worse because it's easier to hate someone who's obviously monstrous than someone who seems perfectly reasonable while treating you as property. But underneath the civilized conversation, the sexual tension builds with calculated precision. His compliments become more personal, his questions more intimate, his casual touches more frequent and lingering. You respond with the trained enthusiasm of someone whose life depends on appearing delighted by whatever attention you receive, even as your mind disconnects from your body in self-protection. When the conversation transitions to physical intimacy, the experience becomes a masterclass in the psychology of powerlessness. The Sultan's technique is sophisticated and attentive. He's clearly learned how to provide physical pleasure to women, but every caress is also an assertion of ownership. He's demonstrating his skill at manipulating your body's responses while making it clear that your pleasure exists entirely for his satisfaction. The other women perform their roles with practiced perfection, creating an elaborate sexual theatre where everyone pretends that enthusiasm is authentic and submission is voluntary. You watch Semele arch her back in apparent ecstasy, while her eyes remain dead and calculating. You observe Rukiye whisper endearments that sound passionate, while positioning herself for the Sultan's optimal viewing pleasure. Your own performance becomes automatic, drawing on years of training in emotional manipulation and physical presentation. Your body responds with trained responsiveness, while your mind retreats to a safe distance, observing the proceedings with the detachment of someone watching actors in a play. This psychological split is the only way to survive the experience without losing your sanity entirely. The Sultan's sexual preferences prove to be as sophisticated and demanding as everything else about him. He requires not just physical compliance, but apparent emotional engagement, not just beauty, but intelligence, not just submission, but the illusion of enthusiasm. Satisfying him requires the kind of complex performance that would challenge professional actors, except the consequences for poor reviews involve potential death, rather than bad publicity. Hours pass in a blur of performance and endurance. You demonstrate techniques learned in preparation sessions, respond to preferences revealed through careful observation, adapt to mood changes that shift without warning. The Sultan evaluates your responses with the attention of a connoisseur, sampling rare wines, making mental notes about your potential for future encounters. As dawn approaches and the experience finally concludes, you realize that you've passed the first test, but potentially doomed yourself to ongoing trials. The Sultan expresses satisfaction with the evening's entertainment and indicates that you'll be summoned again. This is supposedly good news, evidence that your performance met royal standards, but it also means that you're now trapped in a cycle of sexual service that will continue until you fail to maintain his interest or make some mistake that triggers his displeasure. The return journey to the harem feels like emerging from an alternate reality, where the normal rules of human interaction don't apply. You've spent the night performing sexual service for someone who owns you completely, and you're supposed to feel honored by the experience. The cognitive dissonance is overwhelming, but expressing anything other than gratitude would be interpreted as ingratitude, punishable by death. Your fellow concubines greet your return with carefully controlled excitement that masks their own terror about potentially facing similar experiences. Your advancement represents possibility for everyone, but it also serves as a reminder of what success actually means in their world. You've achieved what they all dream about while simultaneously experiencing what they all secretly dread. But perhaps most disturbing is your own reaction to the experience. Despite the fear, the psychological pressure, and the fundamental violation of your agency, there were moments of genuine physical pleasure that your body experienced regardless of your mental state. The Sultan's skill and the luxury of the surroundings created sensory experiences that felt good even while everything else felt horrifying. This involuntary physical response becomes a new source of psychological torture. How can you hate an experience that your body partially enjoyed? How can you maintain your sense of self when your physical responses seem to contradict your mental resistance? The Empire has found a way to make you complicit in your own exploitation at the most fundamental biological level. As you settle into your chamber to rest and process what you've experienced, you understand that your life has entered a new phase that's simultaneously more privileged and more dangerous than anything you faced before. You're now one of the Sultan's women, with all the status and peril that position entails. The question that will determine your future is whether you can navigate the complex psychology of sexual slavery without losing whatever remains of your authentic self. Every future encounter will require the same complex performance of enthusiasm, submission, and availability. Every day will bring the pressure of maintaining the Sultan's interest while competing against other women trying to achieve the same goal. You've won the game that everyone plays and nobody actually wants to win. Your prize is the opportunity to discover that success in this system is just a more sophisticated form of destruction, packaged in silk and perfumed with rare oils but designed to eliminate your humanity just as efficiently as more obvious forms of oppression. Sleep comes fitfully, filled with dreams that mix pleasure and terror in ways that leave you confused about your own reactions. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new performances, and new tests of your ability to survive at the pinnacle of a system designed to destroy women while making them grateful for the privilege. 6 months after that first terrifying night in the Sultan's chambers, you've achieved what passes for the ultimate success in your strange world. You're pregnant with what might be an heir to the Ottoman Empire. The news should feel like victory, but instead, it feels like being handed a poisoned crown that will either elevate you to unprecedented power or kill you in ways you're only beginning to understand. The pregnancy test involves no modern medical technology, just an older woman with experienced hands examining your body for signs that will determine whether you live as a revered mother or die as a failed vessel. When Hakim Bashi, the chief palace physician, confirms what you've suspected for weeks, the emotional response is overwhelming. Relief, terror, hope, and despair, all competing for dominance in your mind. Pregnancy in the imperial harem isn't just a biological condition, it's a political revolution that instantly transforms your status, your daily life, and your survival prospects. You're immediately elevated to Iqbal status, moved to superior quarters, assigned personal servants, and given a monthly salary that makes your previous compensation seem like pocket change. But elevation also means isolation and danger on a scale you're only beginning to comprehend. Every other woman in the harem now sees you as either a threat to be eliminated or an opportunity to be exploited. Your pregnancy represents the possibility of bearing a future sultan, which makes you one of the most powerful and vulnerable people in the entire empire simultaneously. Your new chambers reflect your elevated status in ways both magnificent and ominous. The rooms are spacious enough to house entire families, decorated with tapestries that tell the history of Ottoman conquests, furnished with pieces that represent the finest craftsmanship of multiple civilizations. But they're also essentially a luxurious prison designed to keep you safe from assassination attempts, while ensuring that your every movement can be monitored and controlled. The window in your sitting room looks out onto a private garden, where previous imperial mothers walked during their pregnancies, some of whom bore sultans who conquered continents, others of whom bore sons who were quietly strangled to prevent succession disputes. The garden is beautiful and perfectly maintained, but it's also a memorial to women whose pregnancies ended in either ultimate triumph or ultimate tragedy, with no middle ground between the two outcomes. Your personal servant, Gultan, is a middle-aged woman whose discretion and loyalty have been tested through decades of palace service. She's not just a maid, she's your bodyguard, food taster, and intelligence agent rolled into one. Her life now depends on your safety and success, which makes her one of the few people you can trust, while also making her a potential target for anyone who wants to harm you. Pregnancy in the palace is unlike pregnancy anywhere else, she explains while helping you into the specially designed robes that accommodate your changing body while maintaining imperial elegance. Your child's gender will determine whether you become one of the most powerful women in the world or whether you quietly disappear from history. There is no middle position for mothers in this household. The mathematics of imperial succession are both straightforward and terrifying. If you bear a son, you become a Kadın Efendi with genuine political power and real security for the first time since entering the palace. Male heirs are precious beyond calculation because they represent the future of the dynasty. Their mothers become stakeholders in the empire's continuation, which grants them protection and influence that other women can never achieve. But if you bear a daughter, your value returns to essentially what it was before pregnancy, except now you're older, less sexually appealing, and burdened with a child who provides no political advantages. Daughters of sultans are useful for diplomatic marriages, but don't grant their mothers any lasting security or power. You'll have risked your life for a pregnancy that offers no long-term benefits if the chromosome lottery doesn't favour you. The prenatal care you receive is both comprehensive and deeply unsettling. Palace physicians monitor your health with attention that would impress modern obstetricians, but their concern isn't for your well-being as a person, it's for your function as an incubator for potential imperial property. You're fed specific foods calculated to optimize fetal development, given exercises designed to strengthen your body for childbirth, and monitored constantly for signs of complications that might threaten the pregnancy. But the medical attention also includes procedures that remind you of your fundamental status as state property. Your diet is strictly controlled and regularly tested for poisons. Your movements are limited to areas where your safety can be guaranteed. Your interactions with other women are supervised to prevent emotional stress that might harm the pregnancy. You're being protected like a valuable breeding animal whose welfare matters only insofar as it affects her reproductive output. The psychological pressure of imperial pregnancy proves more difficult than the physical challenges. Every day brings the awareness that you're carrying either your salvation or your doom, and you won't know which until the moment of birth. This uncertainty creates a form of prolonged mental torture that makes previous palace stresses seem manageable by comparison. Your relationship with other pregnant women in the harem becomes particularly complex. Aisha Iqbal, who's 6 months along with her second pregnancy, represents both potential ally and inevitable rival. If she bears a son and you bear a daughter, she'll outrank you permanently. If you both bear sons, your children will become competitors for succession, making friendship between their mothers strategically impossible. We're like gladiators who must smile politely while sharpening our weapons, Aisha observes during one of the carefully supervised social gatherings for pregnant women. The empire demands that we appear to support each other while secretly hoping for each other's failure. It's exhausting to maintain such elaborate emotional deception. The factional politics of the harem intensify around pregnant women, because everyone understands that today's pregnancy might produce tomorrow's sultan. Existing power structures begin shifting to accommodate potential new realities. Women who previously ignored you now seek your favour. Former allies calculate whether continued association will benefit or harm their positions if your circumstances change dramatically. Hattis Kadden, still the most powerful woman in the harem due to her son's position as primary heir, treats your pregnancy with careful diplomatic neutrality. She can't openly oppose you, that would be seen as working against the sultan's interests, but she also can't support you without potentially undermining her own son's future. The result is a relationship of polite cordiality that everyone understands to be temporary and potentially explosive. Your daily routine becomes a carefully orchestrated balance between maintaining your health and managing your political position. Mornings begin with gentle exercises in your private garden, supervised by guards who are simultaneously protecting you and ensuring that you can't escape. The garden is beautiful, but it's also a carefully controlled environment where every plant, every path, every architectural feature has been designed to provide security rather than genuine freedom. Educational activities continue, because an intellectually sophisticated mother is more valuable than an ignorant one. But the curriculum now focuses on subjects relevant to your potential future role. You study the histories of previous valued sultans, learning how successful mothers managed to maintain power and protect their sons. You analyze the political mistakes that led to the downfall of less successful imperial mothers. You're being trained for a job you might never get, preparing for responsibilities that depend entirely on your child's gender. But perhaps most disturbing is how the pregnancy begins to change your own psychology, in ways that align with the empire's interests. The hormonal changes that accompany pregnancy create genuine emotional attachment to the child you're carrying, which makes you more invested in succeeding within the imperial system, rather than resisting it. Your love for your unborn child becomes another chain binding you to an institution designed to exploit you. The empire understands this psychological dynamic and exploits it ruthlessly. Every privilege you receive, every comfort provided, every protection offered, is framed as service to your child rather than to you. You're not being pampered as a person, you're being maintained as an environment for imperial property. But the distinction becomes meaningless when your child's welfare depends entirely on your success within the system. Food takes on political significance that goes far beyond nutrition. Every meal is prepared by trusted cooks, tasted by designated servants, and analysed for potential poisoning attempts. But the precautions also serve as constant reminders that carrying a potential heir makes you a target for every woman whose position might be threatened by your child's success. The delicacies you're served represent the finest cuisine available anywhere in the world. Rare spices from distant territories, fruits cultivated exclusively for imperial consumption, meats from animals raised specifically for palace tables. But every magnificent meal is also a potential murder weapon if your enemies manage to compromise the food preparation process. Luxury and danger become so intertwined that you can't enjoy simple pleasures without calculating risks. Your clothing reflects your elevated status, while also serving practical security functions. The robes are magnificent, silk woven with threads of gold, embroidered with patterns that tell stories of Ottoman greatness, accessorized with jewelry that represents the wealth of continents. But the garments are also designed to make assassination more difficult, with high necklines that protect against poisoned pins, long sleeves that guard against contact poisons, and flowing cuts that conceal any weapons you might need to carry. Sleep becomes increasingly elusive as your mind processes the political complexities of your situation, while your body adapts to the physical demands of pregnancy. You dream about giving birth to sons who grow up to conquer the world, and daughters who bring nothing but disappointment. You have nightmares about assassination attempts that target your unborn child. You fantasize about escape scenarios that become more impossible as your pregnancy advances and your value to the empire increases. The other pregnant women become your closest companions by default, but friendship is complicated by the understanding that your children might someday compete for the throne. Conversations focus on safe topics like poetry and music, while everyone carefully avoids discussing the political implications of their pregnancies. It's like being in a support group for people whose shared experience makes them natural enemies. Letter writing becomes both a privilege and a source of anxiety. As an Iqbal carrying a potential heir, you're now permitted to correspond with family members you haven't seen in years. The letters are heavily censored, but they provide your first contact with the outside world since entering the palace. The news from home feels like reports from another planet. Your parents have aged, your siblings have married and had children, your village has changed in ways that make your old life seem like something that happened to someone else. But the correspondence also serves imperial purposes by providing the government with intelligence about your family and background. Every detail you share about your origins becomes part of your permanent record, potentially useful for political purposes if your child achieves significance. Your family becomes hostages to your cooperation, though this threat is never stated explicitly. The Sultan's attention during your pregnancy feels different than his previous sexual interest, but not necessarily in ways that make the relationship more comfortable. He visits regularly to monitor your condition and discuss your progress, but the conversations feel like status reports from a valuable breeding program, rather than intimate exchanges between partners. His concern for your welfare is genuine, but entirely instrumental. You matter because you're carrying his potential heir, not because he sees you as a person worthy of consideration. These visits become elaborate performances where you must appear grateful for his attention while managing your own complex emotions about a relationship that combines intimate physical connection with absolute power imbalance. The Sultan is simultaneously the father of your child and the person who owns you completely. He's the source of both your current security and your ongoing vulnerability. The pregnancy progresses through months of luxury and terror, comfort and anxiety, hope and despair. Every day brings you closer to a moment that will determine whether you spend the rest of your life as one of the most powerful women in the world, or quietly disappear into imperial obscurity. The uncertainty creates a form of prolonged psychological torture that makes previous palace stresses seem manageable by comparison. But perhaps most disturbing is how completely you've been absorbed into the imperial system's logic. You find yourself genuinely hoping to bear a son, not just for your own security, but because you want your child to have the opportunities that come with imperial power. You've begun to see the world through the empire's eyes, valuing male children more than female ones, accepting hierarchy as natural, interpreting your own exploitation as opportunity. Your transformation from kidnapped village child to imperial mother is nearly complete. The person you used to be feels like a character from a story you heard long ago, rather than your own lived experience. The Empire has succeeded in rebuilding your identity so completely that you now collaborate enthusiastically in maintaining the system that destroyed your original self. As your pregnancy enters its final months, you understand that you're approaching a moment of truth that will determine not just your future, but your fundamental understanding of who you are and what your life has meant. The child you're carrying represents either vindication of every sacrifice you've made, or proof that you've traded your soul for nothing. The palace physicians increase their monitoring as your due date approaches. Preparations begin for a birth that might produce the future ruler of continents, or just another daughter whose existence barely registers in imperial records. Everyone around you is calculating, planning, positioning themselves for potential outcomes that range from your ultimate triumph to your complete irrelevance. You've reached the pinnacle of what's possible within the system that enslaved you, but success feels more like sophisticated failure than genuine achievement. You're about to give birth in a palace while surrounded by luxury that most people can't imagine, but you're also about to discover whether the empire that stole your childhood considers you worthy of survival. The next few weeks will determine whether your story ends in ultimate power or quiet disappearance. Either way, you'll never again be the person you were before the empire decided to own you. The labor pains begin during the pre-dawn call to prayer on a Tuesday in late spring. And by the time the muezzin's voice fades across Istanbul's skyline, your life has entered its most dangerous phase yet. After 9 months of careful protection and political maneuvering, you're about to discover whether the empire considers your contribution to the royal bloodline worth preserving or forgetting. The birthing chamber has been prepared with the kind of attention usually reserved for military campaigns or diplomatic summits. Master physicians from across the empire have been summoned. Specialized midwives with decades of experience attending imperial births have taken residence in the palace. Religious authorities have blessed the room with prayers and holy water. Even the astrologists have been consulted to ensure that the timing and circumstances are as favorable as possible for producing a future ruler. But all of this elaborate preparation serves to remind you that you're not giving birth to a child. You're delivering imperial property, whose value will be determined by factors completely beyond your control. Your months of careful health management, political positioning, and psychological preparation now depend on the chromosome lottery that will determine whether your child is male or female. Gulen assists you through the early stages of labor with the practiced efficiency of someone who's attended dozens of imperial births, most of which ended in either triumph or tragedy, with very little middle ground. Remember that strength is expected, but screaming is discouraged, she whispers while helping you into the specially designed birthing robe. The empire wants evidence of your resilience, not your suffering. The first few hours of labor feel manageable, almost anticlimactic after months of anxiety. The contractions are painful, but bearable. The medical attention is comprehensive, but not intrusive. And the luxury of your surroundings makes the experience feel more like an expensive spa treatment than a potentially life-determining ordeal. You're giving birth on silk sheets in a chamber filled with flowers while servants anticipate your every need. But as the labor intensifies, the underlying tensions become impossible to ignore. Guards are positioned outside your door, ostensibly for protection, but actually to ensure that news of the birth's outcome can be controlled until the empire determines how to respond. Messengers wait in nearby chambers, ready to carry word to various factions whose political futures depend on your child's gender. Even your screams of pain are politically significant, because they might indicate complications that could affect the baby's health. The medical team treats your body with the kind of attention that modern emergency rooms reserve for trauma victims. But their concern isn't for your comfort or survival, it's for the successful delivery of imperial property. Dr. Mehmet Effendi monitors your vital signs with instruments that represent the finest medical technology available in the 16th century, but his focus is entirely on ensuring that nothing threatens the child you're carrying. Pain becomes a secondary consideration compared to maintaining the proper political atmosphere around the birth. You're expected to demonstrate the kind of stoic endurance that befits the mother of a potential sultan, while also showing enough vulnerability to seem human rather than threatening. It's like being asked to perform Shakespeare while having surgery without anesthesia. The technical and emotional demands are almost impossible to balance. But perhaps most psychologically complex is your own emotional state during labor. The physical pain is overwhelming, but it's combined with anticipation, terror, hope, and despair in proportions that shift with each contraction. You're simultaneously giving birth to your child and to your future identity, either as a Kadın Efendi with real power or as a failed mother whose value to the empire has expired. The midwives who attend you have collective experience that spans centuries of imperial births, and their professional competence is genuinely impressive. But their knowledge also includes detailed awareness of what happens to mothers whose children disappoint imperial expectations. They've assisted at births that elevated women to unprecedented power, and births that marked the beginning of those same women's quiet elimination from palace records. Push with conviction, but not desperation, instructs Fatma Ibe, the chief midwife, whose hands have delivered 3 current Kadin Effendi, and countless children who were quietly disposed of when their existence became politically inconvenient. The empire values strength and determination, but desperation suggests lack of faith in divine providence. The hours drag by, with the kind of psychological intensity that makes physical pain seem secondary. Every contraction brings you closer to a moment that will determine whether you spend the rest of your life as one of the most powerful women in the world, or whether you quietly fade into imperial irrelevance. The uncertainty creates a form of mental torture that compounds the physical ordeal of childbirth. Aisha Iqbal's recent birth provides a cautionary example of how quickly imperial favour can shift. She delivered a healthy daughter who was immediately recognised as valuable for future diplomatic marriages, but her own status returned to essentially what it was before pregnancy. The congratulations were polite, the gifts were appropriate, but the political reality was clear. Daughters, however healthy and beautiful, don't provide their mothers with lasting security or power. The final stages of labour become a blur of pain, pressure, and political awareness. Your body is doing what bodies have done for millennia, but every biological process carries political significance that transforms natural experience into state theatre. The moment of crowning isn't just the emergence of your child, it's the revelation of your future. The baby's first cry fills the chamber with sound that everyone interprets as either triumph or disappointment, before anyone has actually determined the child's gender. The medical team works with practiced efficiency to clear airways, assess health, and complete the delivery, but their expressions remain carefully neutral until they can announce results that will determine how the empire responds to this addition to the royal family. Dr. Mehmet Effendi lifts your child, examines the tiny body with clinical precision, and makes the announcement that will define the rest of your life. The Sultan has been blessed with a healthy son. The words hit you like physical blows, but whether they're blows of relief or terror is impossible to determine in the first moment of comprehension. You've won the chromosome lottery that determines imperial success, but winning means accepting responsibility for raising a child who might someday rule continents, or who might be quietly eliminated if succession politics require his removal. The immediate response is choreographed celebration that feels both genuine and terrifying. Servants prostrate themselves in gratitude for the birth of a potential heir. Guards salute the arrival of their possible future commander. Religious authorities offer prayers of thanksgiving for divine favour shown to the imperial household. Everyone is performing appropriate responses to the birth of a prince, while calculating how this development affects their own positions within the palace hierarchy. Your son is immediately wrapped in silk, bearing the Ottoman coat of arms, and presented to you with ceremony that emphasises his imperial significance rather than your maternal connection. He's beautiful, healthy, perfectly formed, and possessed of the kind of infant charisma that makes adults protective rather than indifferent. But he's also imperial property, whose existence will be managed according to state interests that may or may not align with your maternal instincts. The medical attention you receive after delivery is comprehensive, but focused on ensuring your recovery facilitates future reproductive service, rather than your personal well-being. The physicians monitor your healing with the attention they might give to valuable breeding stock, calculating when you'll be ready for potential future pregnancies that might produce additional heirs. But the birth of a son also grants you security and privileges that were previously unimaginable. You're immediately elevated to Kadin Effendi status, the highest rank available to imperial mothers. Your monthly salary increases dramatically. Your quarters are expanded and redecorated to reflect your new position. Most importantly, your life expectancy improves significantly because the empire now has compelling reasons to keep you alive and healthy. The political dynamics of the harem shift overnight in response to your elevation. Women who previously competed with you now seek your favour because your son might someday become their master. Former allies recalculate their strategies based on your enhanced position. Even Hatice Kadin, previously the most powerful woman in the palace, must acknowledge your new status as a potential peer rather than subordinate. Your relationship with the Sultan evolves in ways that feel both more secure and more complex. His visits become more frequent and more focused on your role as mother to his son, rather than your function as his sexual partner. The conversations cover topics like your son's education, his future training, and his eventual role in imperial succession. You're being consulted as a stakeholder in the empire's future, rather than merely used as entertainment for its present ruler. But motherhood in the imperial household proves more complicated than the romantic fantasies suggest. Your son belongs to the empire first, and to you second. His education will be determined by state interests, rather than your preferences. His future will be shaped by political considerations that may require sacrificing his happiness for imperial stability. Even your love for him becomes a tool that the empire can use to ensure your cooperation. The nursing arrangements reflect these complex dynamics perfectly. You're encouraged to breastfeed because maternal bonding serves imperial interests by making you more invested in your son's success. But you're also assigned wet nurses as backup, because your health and availability can't be allowed to interfere with the child's optimal nutrition. Your biological connection to your son is valued but subordinated to systematic management of his development. The recovery period becomes an education in the responsibilities and limitations of imperial motherhood. You're expected to maintain your health and beauty for potential future pregnancies, while also taking active interest in your son's early development. You must balance maternal instincts with political awareness, ensuring that your love for your child doesn't interfere with the empire's plans for his future. Your daily routine transforms to accommodate your new role as mother and high-ranking imperial woman. Mornings begin with feeding and playing with your son, but under supervision that ensures you're not developing overly possessive attachments that might interfere with his imperial education. Afternoons include consultations with tutors and administrators who are already planning your son's curriculum despite his being only weeks old. The naming ceremony for your son becomes a state occasion that demonstrates both your elevated status and your continued subordination to imperial authority. The Sultan chooses the name Mehmet after the conqueror of Constantinople, without consulting your preferences. The ceremony includes elaborate rituals that celebrate the child's imperial significance, while subtly minimizing your role as merely the vessel through which the empire produced another potential ruler. Religious education for your son begins immediately, though he's far too young to understand the instruction. Imams visit regularly to bless his development and ensure that his spiritual formation follows orthodox patterns. But the religious instruction also serves to reinforce imperial ideology that will make him a reliable ruler rather than a potential rebel against the system that created him. The political implications of your son's birth extend far beyond the palace walls. News of a new prince affect diplomatic relationships, military planning, and succession calculations that influence policy across the empire. Foreign ambassadors send congratulations that mask careful analysis of how this development might affect their country's relationships with the Ottoman state. Your personal triumph becomes international news, with ramifications you're only beginning to understand. But perhaps most complex are your own feelings about your transformation from powerless concubine to imperial mother. The security and privilege are genuine improvements in your circumstances, but they come at the cost of accepting responsibility for perpetuating the system that enslaved you. Your son's success will depend on maintaining an empire built on the systematic exploitation of people like your former self. You love your child with the fierce intensity that defines maternal instinct, but you also understand that his future success requires supporting institutions that destroy the lives of countless other children. Your elevation to power comes at the cost of becoming complicit in the continuation of systematic oppression that affects millions of people across the empire's vast territories. Sleep becomes more elusive than ever as you process the psychological complexity of your new position. You're simultaneously more powerful and more trapped than you've ever been. Your son's existence grants you security, but also creates new vulnerabilities because anything that threatens him also threatens you. Your love for him becomes both your greatest strength and your most exploitable weakness. The empire has achieved its ultimate victory over your resistance by giving you something you genuinely want to protect. Your son represents hope for the future, but protecting his interests requires accepting the perpetuation of a system designed to destroy the futures of other people's children. You've become willing collaborator in your own oppression because resistance would threaten the one person in the world who matters more to you than your own freedom. As you drift off to sleep, holding your son in your luxurious chambers, you understand that your transformation from kidnapped child to imperial mother is complete. The Empire has successfully converted you from victim to stakeholder, from opponent to supporter, from someone who might have resisted their system to someone who now has compelling reasons to help maintain it. Your son sleeps peacefully in your arms, unaware that his existence has doomed you to spending the rest of your life protecting an empire that would have destroyed you if you hadn't learnt to be useful to it. But you also understand that your love for him is the most genuine emotion you've experienced since leaving your village, and that protecting his future might be the closest thing to purpose you'll ever find in this strange life the Empire has given you. Tomorrow will bring new challenges related to raising an imperial prince while maintaining your position in a court that remains fundamentally dangerous despite your elevated status. But tonight, you can hold your son and imagine that love might be sufficient to navigate the impossibly complex future that awaits both of you. Your son Mehmet is 6 months old when you first witness what imperial education really means, and the lesson arrives in the form of a tiny silk rope that could strangle a baby without leaving obvious marks. The rope isn't intended for your child. It's a demonstration tool used by Iskender Agha, the palace administrator responsible for managing succession complications. He's explaining the realities of your new life with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing livestock management. Prince Mehmet's survival depends entirely on his political utility. Iskender Agha explains while examining your son with the clinical interest of someone evaluating merchandise. Should circumstances change, should the Sultan die unexpectedly, should another heir prove more suitable, should foreign policy require different succession arrangements, your child's continued existence will be evaluated according to imperial interests rather than maternal preferences. The silk rope demonstration is designed to educate you about the Ottoman practice of eliminating inconvenient princes through methods that appear natural. Infant mortality is common enough that a royal baby's death wouldn't necessarily attract suspicion, especially if the death occurred during apparent illness or accident. The Empire has perfected techniques for removing potential heirs while maintaining plausible deniability about the causes. This isn't hypothetical threat. It's practical education about the environment in which you're now raising your child. The same system that elevated you to unprecedented power and privilege is constantly evaluating whether your son's continued existence serves imperial interests. Your love for him is irrelevant to these calculations, but your ability to make him useful to the Empire is absolutely critical to his survival. Your daily routine with Mehmet becomes an elaborate performance designed to demonstrate proper imperial motherhood, while actually preparing him for a life where his value depends entirely on his utility to a system that sees him as replaceable. Morning feeding sessions are observed by administrators who note his physical development, his apparent intelligence, and his emotional responsiveness. Even his baby laughter is evaluated for signs of the temperament that might make him a suitable future ruler. The toys provided for your son's entertainment are not randomly chosen playthings. They're educational tools designed to begin his imperial conditioning from the earliest possible age. Miniature soldiers teach him to see military force as natural and entertaining. Tiny coins and scales introduce economic concepts that will shape his understanding of wealth and power. Even his rattles are designed to emit sounds that reinforce the cultural preferences and aesthetic standards of the imperial household. But perhaps most disturbing is how your own maternal instincts are systematically redirected to serve imperial purposes. Your natural desire to protect your child is channeled into ensuring his imperial education proceeds smoothly. Your love for him becomes motivation to collaborate enthusiastically with a system that treats both of you as state property. The Empire has made your maternal feelings into another tool for controlling your behavior. The wet nurses assigned to assist with Mehmet's care are not merely domestic help. They're intelligence agents whose job includes monitoring your interactions with your son for signs of potentially problematic maternal attitudes. Excessive affection might suggest that you're developing possessive feelings that could interfere with imperial management of his future. Insufficient bonding might indicate that you lack the emotional investment necessary to ensure his optimal development. Balance is essential, explains Layla Daddy, the chief wet nurse, whose experience includes raising 3 princes who survived to adulthood and 2 who mysteriously died during infancy. The prince must bond with his mother sufficiently to develop proper emotional capacity, but not so strongly that he becomes dependent on maternal approval rather than imperial authority. Every milestone in Mehmet's development becomes a political event that affects your standing within the palace hierarchy. His first smile is interpreted as evidence of good temperament that reflects well on your maternal capabilities. His early attempts at crawling are analysed for signs of the physical coordination that might make him an effective military leader. Even his sleeping patterns are monitored for indications of the self-discipline that characterises successful rulers. The empire's approach to royal child development is simultaneously sophisticated and horrifying. Modern child psychology would recognise many of the techniques as genuinely beneficial for cognitive and emotional development. The stimulation Mehmet receives, the educational activities provided, and the attention paid to his physical health represent the finest childcare available anywhere in the world. But all of this excellent care serves the ultimate purpose of producing a human being who will be capable of managing an empire built on systematic oppression while remaining psychologically comfortable with wielding absolute power over millions of people. Your son is being educated to become someone who can order executions, plan military conquests, and manage slave populations without experiencing the moral qualms that might interfere with effective imperial administration. Language development becomes particularly complex because Mehmet must learn to communicate in multiple languages while also absorbing the ideological frameworks that each language carries. Turkish provides vocabulary for imperial administration and military command. Arabic offers access to religious and legal concepts that justify the empire's authority. Persian delivers cultural sophistication that demonstrates intellectual superiority over conquered populations. But language instruction also includes subtle conditioning designed to shape his emotional responses to different types of people and situations. Words associated with Ottoman identity carry positive connotations that make imperial loyalty feel natural and desirable. Vocabulary related to conquered peoples includes subtle deprecations that make dominance seem appropriate and necessary. Even grammar structures reinforce hierarchical thinking that prepares him to see inequality as normal and justified. Your role in this educational process requires walking an impossibly fine line between nurturing your child and preparing him to become someone you might not recognize or approve of. You must encourage his development while accepting that his success depends on internalizing values that contradict everything you might want to teach him about compassion, equality, and human dignity. Religious education begins before Mehmet can speak, but it's not the Islamic instruction you might expect. Instead, it's imperial theology that presents the Sultan as Allah's representative on earth, and the Ottoman Empire as the divine instrument for bringing order to the world. Your son is learning a version of Islam that justifies absolute power and systematic domination as religious obligations rather than political choices. The religious instructors who visit regularly to oversee Mehmet's spiritual development are not ordinary imams. They're specialists in imperial ideology who understand how to present theological concepts in ways that support imperial authority. They're teaching your son to see conquest as holy work, slavery as divine arrangement, and his own eventual power as religious responsibility rather than political opportunity. But religious education also serves to create emotional distance between your son and the people he might someday rule. By presenting Ottoman superiority as divine mandate rather than historical circumstance, the instruction makes it psychologically easier for him to treat conquered populations as inherently inferior rather than simply unlucky. This theological framework will allow him to order terrible things without experiencing the guilt that might interfere with effective imperial management. Physical training begins remarkably early, with exercises designed to develop the coordination and strength that will eventually support military leadership. Mehmet's playtime includes activities that teach him to see violence as entertainment and physical dominance as natural expression of superiority. Even his toys are miniature weapons that familiarize him with the tools he'll eventually use to maintain imperial control. The trainers responsible for his physical development are former janissaries, whose understanding of military effectiveness comes from years of actual combat experience. They're not just teaching your son to fight, they're teaching him to think like someone whose authority depends on the credible threat of violence. They're conditioning him to see physical force as the ultimate solution to political problems. But physical training also includes education in the specific forms of violence that maintain imperial control. Mehmet is learning to distinguish between force used for imperial purposes, which is noble and necessary, and violence used for personal reasons, which is undisciplined and inappropriate. He's developing the psychological framework that will allow him to order mass executions for political reasons, while maintaining his sense of moral righteousness. Your own education continues as you learn to navigate the complex psychology of imperial motherhood. You attend lessons in the history of successful royal mothers, studying women who managed to protect their sons while advancing their political interests. You analyze the mistakes made by unsuccessful mothers whose children were eliminated when they failed to provide sufficient value to imperial interests. These historical lessons are simultaneously inspiring and terrifying because they demonstrate both the possibilities and the limitations of maternal influence within the imperial system. Some mothers achieved genuine power by successfully raising sons who became effective rulers. Others watched their children die because they failed to anticipate political changes that made their sons inconvenient for imperial purposes. But perhaps most complex are the examples of mothers whose success in protecting their sons required them to sacrifice other people's children. The empire systematically creates situations where maternal love becomes justification for collaborating in the destruction of other families. Your success as a mother might depend on your willingness to support policies that inflict on other women the same losses you're desperately trying to avoid. The political environment of the harem continues to evolve around your elevated status, but your position remains fundamentally precarious despite your apparent success. Other mothers are constantly calculating whether your son's ascendancy would benefit or threaten their own children's futures. Alliances form and dissolve based on shifting assessments of succession possibilities that could change dramatically if political circumstances alter the Sultan's priorities. Aisha Kadhan, whose daughter makes her less politically significant than you, has begun positioning herself as your ally while secretly working to undermine your son's reputation through carefully planted gossip about his development. Hatice Kadhan, whose older son remains the primary heir, treats your child with polite acknowledgement while ensuring that her own son receives more attention and better opportunities for demonstrating his imperial potential. The constant political maneuvering creates an atmosphere where every interaction carries multiple layers of meaning and potential danger. Compliments about Mehmet's development might be genuine appreciation, strategic flattery, or subtle warnings about problems that could affect his future prospects. Offers of assistance might represent authentic friendship, attempts at manipulation, or preparations for betrayal when circumstances make friendship strategically disadvantageous. Your son grows and develops surrounded by this atmosphere of beautiful luxury and underlying threat, learning to navigate social complexity before he can properly walk. His early socialization includes exposure to people whose friendliness conceals deadly ambition, whose gifts carry hidden costs, and whose protection depends entirely on his continued usefulness to their political strategies. But Mehmet also experiences genuine love, excellent education, and care that would be extraordinary by any historical standard. The contradiction between the quality of his daily life and the fundamental insecurity of his position creates a form of psychological complexity that characterizes the entire imperial system. The empire provides its most privileged inhabitants with unprecedented luxury, while reminding them constantly that their continued existence depends on factors entirely beyond their control. As your son approaches his first birthday, you understand that you've successfully navigated the most dangerous period of imperial motherhood. Mehmet has survived infancy, demonstrated normal development, and shown signs of the intelligence and temperament that might make him a viable future ruler. But this success only qualifies you for the next level of imperial challenges, where the stakes become even higher and the psychological pressures more complex. The birthday celebration for an imperial prince is not a family gathering. It's a state occasion that requires months of planning and carries political significance that extends far beyond the palace walls. Foreign ambassadors send gifts that represent their country's assessments of Mehmet's future importance. Domestic officials position themselves to demonstrate loyalty to a potential future ruler. Even the menu for the celebration feast carries diplomatic implications that could affect international relationships. Your role in planning the celebration requires balancing maternal instincts with political awareness. You want your son to enjoy his special day, but every detail must also serve imperial interests and demonstrate appropriate respect for the dynasty. The gifts you allow him to receive, the people permitted to attend, and the activities included in the festivities all send messages about your political alignment and your expectations for his future development. But the birthday also serves as an evaluation period where various factions assess Mehmet's progress and adjust their strategies accordingly. Palace officials observe his behavior for signs of developing personality traits that might affect his suitability for leadership. Other mothers analyze his growth patterns and intellectual development, looking for weaknesses they might exploit or strengths they need to acknowledge in their own planning. The medical examination that accompanies the birthday celebration resembles quality control inspection more than routine healthcare. Palace physicians measure every aspect of Mehmet's physical development, test his reflexes and coordination, and evaluate his responsiveness to various stimuli. The results are documented in detail and analysed for implications about his potential for military leadership, intellectual achievement, and emotional stability. Dr. Mehmet Efendi's assessment is comprehensive and chilling in its clinical objectivity. The prince demonstrates excellent physical development, consistent with superior breeding. His motor skills are advanced for his age, suggesting good coordination that might translate to military capability. His vocal development indicates normal intellectual progression, though definitive assessment of cognitive ability must await further maturation. The medical report becomes part of Mehmet's permanent record, used for planning his education and evaluating his long-term prospects for imperial service. But it also provides information that could be used against him if political circumstances make his elimination advisable. Every strength documented in his medical files could be reinterpreted as potential threat if he ever becomes inconvenient for imperial purposes. Your own psychological state during this period reflects the fundamental contradictions of your position. You experience genuine joy watching your son develop and achieve developmental milestones. His first steps, his first words, his growing awareness of the world around him provide the kind of maternal satisfaction that makes all previous suffering seem worthwhile. But every moment of happiness is shadowed by awareness that his continued existence depends on factors entirely beyond your control. The sleep deprivation that accompanies caring for a young child is compounded by political anxiety that never completely disappears. You lie awake calculating potential threats to Mehmet's future, analysing recent political developments for signs of changing imperial priorities, and planning strategies for protecting him from dangers that might emerge from directions you haven't anticipated. But perhaps most disturbing is how you begin to internalise the Empire's logic about your son's value and purpose. When Mehmet demonstrates intelligence or physical coordination, you feel proud not just because he's developing well, but because his capabilities increase his utility to the imperial system. When he shows signs of the temperament that might make him an effective ruler, you experience satisfaction that comes from succeeding at producing valuable human property, rather than simply raising a healthy child. The Empire has succeeded in making you complicit in your son's commodification, by making his imperial value synonymous with his personal well-being. Protecting him requires ensuring his usefulness to a system designed to exploit people like your former self. Loving him means accepting responsibility for raising someone who might someday order terrible things in service of imperial interests. Educational planning for Mehmet's future becomes your primary responsibility as he approaches his second year. The curriculum being developed for his instruction represents the finest education available anywhere in the world, but it's also designed to produce someone capable of managing systematic oppression while maintaining psychological comfort with unlimited power. The tutors being selected for his education are not randomly chosen teachers, they're specialists in imperial conditioning, whose job involves shaping his intellectual and emotional development in ways that serve state interests. They're experts in presenting complex information in forms that will make him an effective ruler, rather than a moral philosopher who might question the Empire's methods. Language instruction will expand to include diplomatic protocols that teach him to communicate with foreign dignitaries while maintaining imperial superiority. Mathematical education will focus on taxation systems, military logistics, and economic management that keeps conquered populations productive but not prosperous enough to fund rebellion. Historical instruction will present Ottoman expansion as inevitable and beneficial, while ignoring or justifying the human costs of imperial conquest. But the most sophisticated aspect of his education will be psychological conditioning designed to make him comfortable with wielding absolute power over other human beings. He'll learn to see inequality as natural, slavery as economically necessary, and military conquest as bringing civilization to inferior peoples. The education will provide him with intellectual frameworks that justify any action he might need to take as an imperial ruler. Your involvement in planning this education requires accepting that your son's success depends on his willingness to perpetuate the system that enslaved you. The better mother you are, the more effectively you prepare him for imperial leadership, the more complicit you become in maintaining institutions designed to destroy other people's families. Success as an imperial mother means failure as a human being who might otherwise oppose systematic oppression. The social dynamics among the harem's children become increasingly complex as they grow old enough to understand their relative positions within the imperial hierarchy. Mehmet's playmates include other royal children whose futures depend on succession arrangements that make them either allies or enemies depending on political circumstances that could change without warning. Watching your son interact with other imperial children provides disturbing insights into how the empire shapes personality development from the earliest possible age. Competition is encouraged through games that reward dominance and punish weakness. Cooperation is selective, extended only to children whose support might be politically useful. Even friendship becomes strategic, evaluated according to potential future benefits rather than emotional compatibility. The empire creates an environment where children learn to see other people as resources to be managed, rather than individuals to be respected. Mehmet is developing social skills that will serve him well as an imperial ruler, while making him fundamentally unsuited for relationships based on equality, mutual respect, or genuine intimacy. His education in human manipulation begins before he's old enough to understand what manipulation means. Religious instruction intensifies as Mehmet becomes capable of understanding more complex concepts, but the Islam he's learning bears little resemblance to the faith practiced by ordinary believers. Imperial theology presents the Sultan as Allah's chosen representative, Ottoman expansion as divine mission, and absolute power as religious obligation rather than political choice. The religious teachers assigned to his instruction are specialists in presenting theological concepts in ways that support imperial authority rather than developing spiritual insight or moral sensitivity. They're teaching him to use religious language to justify political decisions, to see conquest as holy work, and to interpret resistance to imperial authority as opposition to divine will. But religious education also provides psychological frameworks that will allow him to order terrible things without experiencing guilt that might interfere with effective leadership. By presenting imperial actions as religious necessities, the instruction creates mental categories that separate his personal morality from his political responsibilities. He's learning to compartmentalize his conscience in ways that will make him psychologically comfortable with wielding unlimited power. Military education begins informally through play activities that familiarize Mehmet with weapons, tactics, and the psychology of command. His toys include miniature armies, siege equipment, and fortress models that teach him to see military force as entertaining and conquest as natural expression of imperial superiority. The military instructors responsible for his warrior training are veteran commanders whose understanding of effective leadership comes from years of actual combat experience. They're not just teaching him to fight, they're teaching him to think like someone whose authority depends on the credible threat of violence, and whose success requires willingness to sacrifice other people's lives for imperial objectives. Physical training emphasizes not just individual combat skills, but also the leadership presence that inspires loyalty in subordinates, while intimidating enemies. Mehmet is learning to project authority through posture, voice, and gesture. He's developing the psychological tools that will allow him to command armies, intimidate rivals, and maintain discipline among populations that might otherwise rebel against imperial control. Your relationship with Mehmet becomes increasingly complicated as he develops the personality traits that will make him an effective imperial ruler. The qualities that ensure his political success, his developing sense of superiority, his comfort with commanding others, his assumption that his wants should be immediately satisfied, make him less appealing as a person, while making him more valuable as imperial property. Watching your son transform from innocent child into potential tyrant creates cognitive dissonance that threatens your psychological stability. You love him completely, while simultaneously recognizing that his success requires him to become someone who might horrify the person you used to be. The empire has created a situation where good motherhood means collaborating in the production of a human being capable of ordering genocide while sleeping peacefully. But the alternative to supporting his imperial education is accepting his elimination by people who would replace him with someone more suitable for imperial purposes. Your choice isn't between raising a good person or a bad person. It's between raising someone capable of surviving in an imperial system or watching him die because he lacks the psychological tools necessary for managing unlimited power. The palace environment continues to provide Mehmet with luxury that would be extraordinary by any historical standard, while simultaneously preparing him for responsibilities that will require psychological flexibility that borders on sociopathy. He's growing up surrounded by beauty, comfort, and intellectual stimulation, while learning to see other human beings as resources to be managed, rather than individuals worthy of consideration. As Mehmet approaches his second birthday, you understand that your transformation from kidnapped village child to imperial mother is entering its final phase. Your son's continued development and political advancement require you to become an active collaborator in maintaining the system that destroyed your original life. Your love for him has become the Empire's most effective tool for ensuring your cooperation with institutions designed to inflict on other families the same losses you're desperately trying to avoid. But late at night, when the palace is quiet and you're alone with your thoughts, you still remember the girl who used to dream of different kinds of lives. She's buried deep under years of imperial conditioning and maternal anxiety, but she's still there, watching in horror as you teach your son to become someone she would have fought against if circumstances had been different. Tomorrow will bring new challenges related to raising an imperial prince, while maintaining your sanity in a system designed to transform love into complicity. But tonight, you can hold your sleeping son and imagine that somewhere in his developing mind there might still be room for the kind of compassion that the Empire is systematically trying to eliminate. 5 years have passed since your son's birth, and you've achieved what few women in the Empire ever manage: genuine security combined with real political influence. You're now Haseki Sultan, the Sultan's most favoured consort and mother to the current heir apparent. Your son Mehmet is healthy, intelligent, and showing every sign of developing into the kind of ruler the Empire needs. Your position seems unassailable, which means you're probably about 3 months away from complete destruction. The Ottoman imperial system has a peculiar relationship with success. It rewards achievement just long enough to make people comfortable, then systematically eliminates anyone who becomes too powerful, too secure, or too confident in their position. Your elevation to the pinnacle of harem hierarchy has made you one of the most dangerous women in the Empire, not because you pose any threat to imperial interests, but because your very success makes you a target for everyone else's ambitions. The daily routine of maintaining ultimate status requires political skills that would challenge professional diplomats. Your morning audiences include representatives from various court factions, each seeking your support for their particular agendas, while simultaneously gathering intelligence they can use against you when circumstances make betrayal advantageous. Every conversation is a chess match, where the stakes are life and death, and the rules change depending on who's currently winning. Your chambers now occupy an entire wing of the palace, with rooms for audiences, private study, religious observance, and entertaining the other high-ranking women whose friendship you need, while their loyalty remains perpetually questionable. The luxury is overwhelming: silk wall hangings that cost more than small kingdoms, furniture inlaid with precious metals and gems, carpets woven by master craftsmen who spent years creating each piece. But luxury also serves as golden handcuffs that make alternative life choices psychologically unthinkable. How could you return to village life when you're accustomed to meals prepared by chefs who create culinary art? How could you sleep on rough bedding when you're used to silk sheets that cost more than most people's annual income? The Empire has made you addicted to a lifestyle that requires continued imperial favour to maintain. Your relationship with the Sultan has evolved into something resembling partnership, though the partnership operates entirely on his terms and could be revoked without warning if his priorities change. He consults you on matters of policy, values your opinions about court appointments, and treats you as something approaching an equal in private conversations. But equality in the harem means being the most favoured among his possessions, rather than being recognised as an autonomous human being. The conversations with the Sultan reveal the intellectual sophistication required for managing a transcontinental empire, while also demonstrating the moral blindness that allows him to treat systematic oppression as administrative routine. He discusses military campaigns that will displace millions of people with the same casual interest he shows for garden landscaping projects. He evaluates tax policies that will impoverish entire regions with the detached analysis he applies to menu planning for state dinners. Your role in these conversations requires walking an impossibly fine line between providing useful counsel and avoiding any suggestions that might challenge his fundamental assumptions about imperial authority. You can offer tactical advice about specific policies, but questioning the underlying systems that make those policies necessary would be interpreted as disloyalty punishable by death. But perhaps most disturbing is how completely you've internalized the logic of imperial management. When the Sultan describes plans for conquering new territories, you find yourself analyzing the strategic implications rather than considering the human costs. When he discusses taxation policies designed to extract maximum wealth from subject populations, you evaluate the economic efficiency rather than the moral implications of systematic exploitation. The empire has succeeded in transforming you into exactly the kind of advisor who can help manage oppression more effectively while maintaining plausible deniability about its moral consequences. Your intelligence and education serve imperial interests, while your position prevents you from developing genuine alternatives to the system that created your privilege. Mehmet's education has expanded to include subjects that prepare him for eventual imperial responsibilities, and your involvement in planning his curriculum requires accepting that his future success depends on his willingness to order terrible things in service of imperial interests. His tutors now include specialists in military strategy, economic policy, and administrative efficiency, experts in the practical skills required for managing systematic oppression on a continental scale. But educational planning also reveals the empire's sophisticated understanding of psychological conditioning required for producing effective tyrants. Mehmet is learning to see conquered populations as resources to be managed, rather than people whose welfare deserves consideration. His instruction in history presents Ottoman expansion as inevitable progress rather than systematic destruction of other people's civilizations. The religious education he receives presents Islam as divine justification for imperial authority rather than spiritual framework for moral development. His tutors teach him to use religious language to justify political decisions, while avoiding theological concepts that might encourage compassion for people outside the imperial hierarchy. He's learning to weaponize faith rather than allowing it to constrain his political options. Your son's development into a potential tyrant creates ongoing psychological trauma that you're not allowed to acknowledge or address. Watching him lose empathy, develop casual cruelty, and internalize assumptions about his superiority over other human beings horrifies the person you used to be while satisfying the imperial mother you've become. But the alternative to supporting his transformation is accepting his elimination by people who would replace him with someone more suitable for imperial purposes. Your choice remains between raising a child capable of surviving an enhanced system designed to reward sociopathy, or watching him die because he retains too much humanity to function effectively as an absolute ruler. The harem politics surrounding your elevated position have intensified to levels that make previous competition seem like children's games. Other mothers are constantly calculating whether their children's futures would benefit from your continued success or your spectacular downfall. Alliances form and dissolve based on shifting assessments of succession possibilities that change with every piece of palace gossip or imperial policy decision. Aisha Kadın has repositioned herself as your primary rival by successfully bearing the Sultan a second son, who shows promise of becoming an alternative heir if circumstances eliminate Mehmet from succession considerations. Her strategy involves presenting her child as a backup option while systematically undermining confidence in your son's suitability through carefully planted suggestions about his temperament, health, or intellectual development. The competition between imperial mothers operates at levels of sophistication that would impress intelligence agencies. Information warfare, psychological manipulation, economic pressure, and social isolation are deployed with surgical precision. Every woman has developed expertise in destroying rivals while maintaining plausible deniability about their aggressive intentions. But perhaps most insidious is how the empire encourages this competition. by creating systemic uncertainty about succession arrangements. The Sultan could theoretically designate any of his sons as heir, change his preferences based on political considerations, or eliminate potential successors if they become inconvenient for imperial purposes. This uncertainty ensures that every mother remains desperate to advance her child's position, while undermining her competitors. Your daily schedule now includes regular intelligence briefings from your network of informants throughout the palace. Servants, eunuchs, guards, and other concubines provide information about developing threats, shifting loyalties, and potential opportunities for advancing your position while protecting your son's interests. Managing this intelligence network requires skills in human psychology that border on manipulation therapy. You must maintain loyalty among people whose own survival depends on serving imperial interests that may conflict with your welfare. You need to extract reliable information from sources who have compelling reasons to provide misinformation. You must distinguish between genuine threats and deliberate disinformation designed to make you waste resources responding to non-existent dangers. The physical security arrangements for you and your son have expanded to include precautions that acknowledge the genuine dangers of your position. Food tasters test everything you eat for poisons that could eliminate you or damage your son's development. Guards monitor your movements to prevent assassination attempts. Even your clothing is inspected for hidden weapons or toxic substances that could be used against you. But security measures also serve as constant reminders that your elevated status makes you a target for everyone whose ambitions require your elimination. The guards protecting you are the same people who would execute you if imperial interests required your removal. The servants ensuring your safety are also monitoring your behavior for signs of disloyalty that could justify your destruction. Religious observance becomes increasingly important as your political position requires public demonstrations of piety that legitimize your authority while providing cover for activities that might otherwise seem morally questionable. Your daily prayers are observed by people who interpret your spiritual devotion as evidence of your fitness for imperial responsibility. But religious practice also provides psychological frameworks for managing the cognitive dissonance created by your position. Islamic concepts like submission to Allah's will help justify your acceptance of systems designed to oppress other people. Theological ideas about divine providence make it easier to interpret your success as evidence of moral righteousness rather than systematic collaboration with institutional evil. The charitable activities expected of someone in your position create additional opportunities for both genuine good works and sophisticated political maneuvering. Your donations to religious institutions, support for educational projects, and assistance to worthy causes demonstrate the beneficence that legitimizes imperial authority while building networks of obligation that serve your political interests. But charity work also provides disturbing insights into the scope of imperial oppression and your complicity in maintaining systems that create the problems you're trying to address through philanthropy. The poverty you're alleviating results from taxation policies you help design. The religious institutions you support teach ideologies that justify the conquest and enslavement that fund your donations. Your correspondence with officials throughout the empire reveals the scope of your informal influence, while also demonstrating the limitations of power that operates entirely through personal relationships rather than institutional authority. Provincial governors seek your advice on local policy questions. Military commanders request your support for strategic initiatives. Religious leaders ask for your endorsement of theological positions. This informal influence feels like genuine power, but it's entirely dependent on maintaining the Sultan's favor and could disappear overnight if political circumstances change. Your authority exists only as long as other people believe that you speak for imperial interests, and that belief could be revoked without warning if the Sultan decides that your usefulness has expired. The educational opportunities available to you as Husky Sultan include instruction in subjects that were previously forbidden to someone of your background. You study law, philosophy, military strategy, and economic theory with some of the empire's finest scholars. The intellectual stimulation is genuine and deeply satisfying after years of having your curiosity constrained by the limitations of your position. But advanced education also serves imperial purposes by making you a more effective advisor and administrator, while ensuring that your increased knowledge serves systems designed to exploit the kinds of people you used to be. Your legal studies focus on techniques for extracting taxes and maintaining order rather than protecting individual rights. Your economic education emphasizes resource extraction and population management rather than improving general welfare. The philosophical instruction you receive presents ethical frameworks that justify imperial authority rather than encouraging moral reasoning that might challenge systematic oppression. You're learning to think more sophisticatedly about the same fundamental assumptions rather than developing intellectual tools that might lead to genuinely alternative conclusions. Your relationship with other high-ranking women in the empire reveals the complex psychology of people who've achieved success within oppressive systems while remaining vulnerable to those same systems' capacity for sudden reversal. These women are simultaneously your closest allies and your most dangerous enemies, united by shared experience of imperial conditioning while divided by competition for limited positions within the hierarchy. The conversations among successful imperial women operate on multiple levels simultaneously. Surface discussions about cultural topics, family matters, and charitable activities conceal ongoing intelligence gathering, alliance building, and strategic planning for potential future conflicts. Every social interaction serves multiple purposes related to both immediate political objectives and long-term survival planning. But these relationships also provide the only opportunities for genuine understanding and emotional support available within the imperial system. These women share experiences that no one else can comprehend, the psychological complexity of loving children while preparing them to become tyrants, the moral compromises required for maintaining privilege within oppressive institutions, the constant anxiety of knowing that success makes you a target for elimination. As your 5th year as Husky Sultan draws to a close, you understand that you've achieved everything the empire offers to women, while simultaneously becoming completely trapped within the system that enabled your elevation. Your success represents the ultimate proof that the empire can provide opportunities for advancement while maintaining its fundamental character as an institution designed to exploit human beings for the benefit of absolute power. Your story has become a testament to the empire's sophisticated understanding of human psychology and its ability to transform victims into collaborators through carefully managed combinations of opportunity, education, and systematic conditioning. You've climbed from the bottom of the imperial hierarchy to its pinnacle while never escaping the fundamental reality that your value depends entirely on your utility to systems designed to destroy people like your former self. But perhaps most disturbing is how completely you've internalized imperial logic while retaining enough self-awareness to recognize your transformation. You can still remember the girl who was kidnapped from her village, but that person feels like a character from someone else's story rather than your own lived experience. The empire has succeeded in making you complicit in your own moral destruction while providing you with enough sophistication to understand exactly what's been done to you. Tomorrow will bring new challenges related to maintaining your position while protecting your son's future within a system that remains fundamentally unpredictable despite your apparent mastery of its dynamics. But tonight, as you fall asleep in chambers that represent the pinnacle of human luxury, you understand that your greatest success is also your most complete failure. You've achieved everything possible within a system designed to make such achievement meaningless. The empire has won its ultimate victory over your resistance by giving you everything you learned to want, while ensuring that getting it required abandoning everything you originally valued. Your triumph is complete, which means your destruction as a human being is also complete. But in the darkness before dawn, when the palace is quiet and you're alone with thoughts you're no longer certain belong to you, you can still sense the presence of that kidnapped village girl, buried deep under years of imperial conditioning but somehow still alive, still watching, still waiting for an opportunity to remind you who you used to be before the empire taught you to be grateful for your own enslavement. Good night, dear listeners.